which will be highlighting the challenges of climate change. Now, I'm stating the obvious, I know, when I say it's been a tough year for all of us. There's not one corner of the world that's been unaffected by the COVID-19 pandemic. But you know, one important lesson that's emerged from the pandemic is that it's told us that we all have to respond collectively and in collaboration to meet common global challenges. It's in this spirit of cooperation that we all come here together today for this summit to put our collective weight behind the goals of the Paris Agreement 2015. Now, the Climate Ambition Summit is just that. It brings together ambitious climate leaders with their ambitious, urgent cuts that they're going to be making in greenhouse gas emissions, delivering ambitious plans and targets, and also making sure that they have the funds and the right policies in place to achieve these targets. We're going to be hearing from lots of people. We're going to be hearing from governments, from businesses, from civil society, especially indigenous peoples and youth, the youth voices. And they're going to be telling us about their own experiences of the impact of climate change, but also, very importantly, the kind of positive action they're taking. And we're going to be paving the way with our summit today for, of course, COP26, and the United Kingdom is hosting that in November next year in Glasgow, Scotland. Now, we want you all to be part of this. Just go to #ClimateAction and you can be part of today's conversations, react to what you hear being said and what you're seeing, and there's lots and lots of material on there as well. Now, we're going to kick off our proceedings by setting the scene for you with a film, and this film is made by WWF and also the team who are behind the latest David Attenborough film, A Life on Our Planet. And this film is really going to set the scene in the way which we want to, which is by putting the focus on young people, because we're going to hear young voices from all over the world, all calling for change and demanding action on climate change. So let's start with that film.
Climate change is the biggest threat to humanity right now. It really is time for us to start listening to the science.
We all really care, so why is nothing happening?
This is your inheritance, and an inheritance has got to be turned over in good shape.
We have very little time before it's too late.
Climate change is the biggest threat of my generation.
The risk that we face from climate change is our existence.
Stop thinking this only happens in other parts of the world. Stop thinking that you are safe just because you are not see the fires in front of your eyes.
The big question in Paris is, can the world's nations agree on a climate plan that will really make a real difference?
L'accord de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
Representatives from more than 160 nations are signing a historic climate agreement now at the United Nations. It aims to limit global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius.
Right now, we're facing a man-made disaster of global scale.
Hotter temperatures, frequent bushfires, drought and intense cyclones.
If we don't take action, The collapse of our civilizations and the extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon.
Now to a dire warning about climate change. According to a new report, experts say that we have until 2030 to avoid catastrophe. It also says if unprecedented changes are not made and made soon, there will be irreversible damage to the planet.
If nothing changes, the human species is not going to exist. And it's not just us, it's also the whole ecosystem is not going to survive these changes. So it's going to be a mass extinction of all species.
Concept anymore. This is the time for a real actions.
I think everybody now needs to work together to fight climate change. We can't pass the blame on to others.
It is vital for us to be able to continue this fight and to actually accomplish our goal, which is to save the planet.
This is the race that we must win if we must secure our future, our life on Earth.
We have a decade to make ambitious, incredible changes that we really need in order to survive.
So, some powerful voices there in that film, really giving us some powerful messages. And that's just the first of several films we're going to be showing you today. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce one of the co-hosts of today's Climate Ambition Summit, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. Secretary General, welcome to you from headquarters in New York. And in your recent State of the Planet address, you very much outlined in that wonderful speech how the objectives of getting a global coalition for carbon neutrality is really going to be your central ambition at the United Nations in 2021. So, Secretary General, please tell us more.
Dear co-conveners, excellencies, dear friends of our planet, I'm pleased to welcome you to the Climate Ambition Summit on the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. 5 years after Paris, we are still not going in the right direction. Paris promised to limit temperature rise to as close as to 1.5 degrees as possible. But the commitments made in Paris were far from enough to get there, and even those commitments are not being met. Carbon dioxide levels are at record highs. Today, we are 1.2 degrees hotter than before the Industrial Revolution. If we don't change course, we may be headed for a catastrophic temperature rise of more than 3 degrees this century. Can anybody still deny that we are facing a dramatic emergency? That is why today I call on all leaders worldwide to declare a state of climate emergency in their countries until carbon neutrality is reached. Some 38 countries have already done so, recognizing the urgency and the stakes. I urge all others to follow. Dear friends, we are not doomed to fail. The recovery from COVID-19 presents an opportunity to set our economies and societies on a green path in line with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. But that is not yet happening. So far, the members of the G20 are spending 50% more in their stimulus and rescue packages on sectors linked to fossil fuel production and consumption than on low-carbon energy. And this is unacceptable. The trillions of dollars needed for COVID recovery is money that we are borrowing from future generations. And this is a moral test. We cannot use these resources to lock in policies that burden future generations with a mountain of debt on a broken planet. And so, the central objective of the United Nations for 2021 is to build a truly global coalition for carbon neutrality by the middle of the century. But that promise is not enough. To make it a reality, we need meaningful cuts now to reduce global emissions by 45% by 2030 compared with 2010 levels. And this must be fully reflected in the revised and strengthened nationally determined contributions that the Paris signatories are obliged to submit well before COP26 next year in Glasgow. I commend those leaders that will come forward today with new targets for 2025 and 2030. The United Kingdom has pledged to cut emissions by 68% by 2030 compared to 1990. The European Union has agreed to cut their emissions by at least 55% by 2030 compared to 1990. These decisions deserve to be emulated. Every country, city, financial institution, and company needs to adopt plans to reach net zero emissions by 2050 and start executing them now, including by providing clear short-term targets. Key emitting sectors such as shipping, aviation, and industry must also present and implement new transformational roadmaps in line with this goal. Technology is on our side. Sound economic analysis is our ally. Renewable energy is getting less expensive with every passing day. Climate action can be the catalyst for millions of new jobs, better health, and resilient infrastructure. But let us remember that this transition must be just and also recognize that women's leadership is good for climate action. Chers amis, les politiques économiques et les financements mondiaux doivent être au diapason de l'accord de Paris et des objectifs de développement durable. Il est grand temps de fixer un prix au carbone, d'éliminer progressivement le financement des combustibles fossiles et de mettre un terme aux subventions dont ils bénéficient, d'arrêter de construire de nouvelles centrales à charbon, de faire peser l'impôt non plus sur le revenu mais sur le carbone, non plus sur les contribuables mais sur les pollueurs, de rendre obligatoire la divulgation des risques financiers liés au climat et d'intégrer l'objectif de neutralité carbone dans toutes les politiques et décisions économiques et budgétaires. Le secteur financier privé doit aider les entreprises à transformer leurs modèles économiques, aligner ses investissements avec l'objectif de neutralité carbone et publier ses progrès en ce sens. Les propriétaires et gestionnaires d'actifs doivent décarboner leur portefeuille. Les institutions financières internationales et les banques de développement nationales doivent mobiliser les fonds d'investissement privés pour les pays en développement. Et les pays dits développés doivent tenir leur engagement de rassembler chaque année 100 milliards de dollars pour les pays en développement à partir de 2020. Nous n'y sommes pas encore. Notre objectif collectif doit être d'aller encore plus loin et de dépasser ces 100 milliards de dollars par an en 2021 et de revoir à la hausse les financements publics internationaux ensuite. Mais aujourd'hui, l'adaptation ne représente que 20% des financements concernant le climat. Nous avons besoin d'une véritable percée sur l'adaptation et la résilience. Et c'est particulièrement urgent pour les petits États insulaires en développement dont l'existence même est menacée. L'adaptation ne doit pas être le grand oublié de l'action climatique. Dear friends of our planet, this is a moment of truth. This is also a moment of hope. More and more countries have committed to net zero emissions. The business community is getting on board the sustainability train. We see cities striving to become greener and more livable. We see young people taking on responsibility and demanding it of others. Mindsets are shifting. Climate action is the barometer of leadership in today's world. It is what people and planet need at this time. We have the blueprint, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Paris Agreement on climate change. But we all need to pass a credibility test. Let's make the promise of a net zero world a reality now. On the path to COP26, I urge everyone to show ambition, stop the assault on our planet, and do what we need to guarantee the future of our children and grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you so much indeed, Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, for that tour de force and that rallying cry. So next we hear from the host country of COP26, the United Kingdom, and of course the Right Honourable Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson. And the UK will be hosting the 26th UN Climate Conference in Glasgow next year, COP26. And the government recently announced its new emissions target, its Nationally Determined Contribution, NDC for short, aiming for at least a 68% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. Welcome to you, live, Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
Thank you very much, Zainab, and thank you, Secretary General Antonio, my fellow leaders, excellencies. Good afternoon from London, where we're coming to the end of an extraordinary and difficult year, I think with a sudden surge of scientific optimism. Because after barely 12 months of the pandemic, We're seeing the vaccine going into the arms of the elderly and the vulnerable, vaccines that are the product, each and every one of them, of vast international efforts in laboratories around the world. And so my message to you all is that together we can use scientific advances to protect our entire planet, our biosphere, against a challenge far worse, far more destructive, even than coronavirus. And by the Promethean power of our invention, we can begin to defend the Earth against the disaster of global warming. And by that, I mean that together we can reduce our emissions, we can radically cut our dependence on fossil fuels, we can change our agricultural practices, and in short, we can reverse the process by which, for centuries, humanity has been quilting our planet in a toxic tea cozy of greenhouse gases. And at the same time, we can create hundreds of thousands of jobs, millions of jobs across the planet as we collectively recover from coronavirus. And if you doubt our ability to do that, let me tell you that when I was a child of 6, this country depended on coal for 70% of our energy needs. That coal dependency is now down to 3% or less. And since 1990, the UK has cut our CO2 emissions by 43%, more than any other G20 nation, and yet our economy has grown by 75%. And today, we're putting our foot to the accelerator in a carbon-friendly way, of course, with a 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. We want to turn the UK into the Saudi Arabia of wind power generation, enough wind power by 2030 to supply every single one of our homes with electricity. We're going ahead with massive solar programs, even though we can't hope to emulate the incredible things being done by India or Australia or Morocco, for instance. Hydro, of course, we're going ahead with liberating the awesome potential of hydrogen, whether for homes or all sorts of other uses. On electric vehicles, we're going to ban ICEs, internal combustion engines, new internal combustion engines, by 2030 with a very ambitious program. We'll continue to develop new nuclear power. We want to lengthen the lead of London and the UK as the natural home of green finance. We want our homes to be progressively emitting less and less CO2 with more and more retrofitting of our homes. And whatever the UK may be accused of lagging in, we won't be lagging, my friends, in lagging. We want to encourage all modes of green transport, cycling, walking, and so on. We want to use the relatively new miracle of carbon capture and storage actually to take carbon from power generation or industrial processes and bury it in undersea caverns created by the extraction of hydrocarbons. And we are now consecrating 30% of our waters, 30% of our land surface to nature, because we think that nature, wild nature, is the best and most effective way of retaining carbon in a natural balance. And we do all these things because they're right for the world, they're right for our country, but also because we know that this green industrial revolution will generate, as I say, hundreds of thousands of high-skill, high-paid, good-quality jobs for generations to come. And we're going to help our friends around the world by moving away from supporting drilling and mining for hydrocarbons, but putting £11.6 billion of our overseas aid to support green technology and decarbonisation across the planet. So we want to work with all of you on this call, on this conference. Let's do it together. Let's make it our collective commitment, as Antonio has just said, to get to net zero by 2050. And we in the UK, as he says, we're going to do our bit. We're reducing our emissions by 68% at least on 1990 levels over the next decade. And I'm really awed and humbled by the efforts of other countries around the world to set their own targets. And I just want to repeat that key message. We're doing this. We're doing this. Not because we're hair shirt wearing tree-hugging, mung bean munching eco-freaks. So I've got nothing against any of those categories, and mung beans are probably delicious. We're doing it because we know that scientific advances will allow us, collectively, as humanity, to save our planet and create millions of high-skilled jobs as we recover from COVID. So thank you all very much for joining this conference, this Ambition Summit. Thank you to Secretary General Antonio. Thank you to my co-host, Emmanuel Macron, who I know shares my keen interest in protecting the ecosystems of our seas and oceans. And I look forward to seeing you all in Glasgow face-to-face in November next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your robust speech there. Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and of course host of COP26 in November in Glasgow next year. And you mentioned at the beginning, Prime Minister, about the vaccine for COVID-19, but of course it was the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, who said there is no vaccine for the planet in that recent speech he made on the state of our planet. So thank you very much indeed there. So we've heard two world leaders, but when we're talking about climate action, of course, it's what happens at the grassroots level that is also absolutely critical. So next to speak is Archana Soring, and Archana is an environmental activist, and I want to get this right, belonging to the indigenous Karia community from the Bihaband village of Rajanganpur in Sundargarh, Odisha in India. And now she's a member of the United Nations Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. And Archana has got two key messages that she wants everybody, all the world leaders, to hear today to really help drive ambitious climate action. So let's hear Archana's message.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Johar. I'm Archana Soring from Kharia tribe, an indigenous community from India. At this summit, I have two key messages for the world leaders. Firstly, for sustained climate action, it is prerequisite to respect, learn and empower the worldviews and traditional knowledge of indigenous and local communities. In most of the countries, indigenous peoples, traditional forest dwellers and local communities are threatened by illicit activities and extractive developmental projects along with top-down governance. Therefore, they need to be made an integral part of the decision-making processes. And most importantly, their rights over their territories, land and forests needs to be respected, recognized and enforced. As part of COVID-19 recovery efforts, countries need to engage in participatory climate action without undermining the rights of indigenous and local communities and not bailing out industries responsible for climate crisis. This calls for a shift towards prioritizing health of nature before development, which requires intergenerational dialogue appreciating intersectionality. Secondly, to attain and go beyond Sustainable Development Goals and Paris Agreement commitments, make youth an integral part of decision-making and implementation process of climate action. It is we youth who are and will be bearing the brunt of climate crisis. Thus, it is important to create safe and enabling spaces for meaningful youth dialogue and recognizing the contribution of youth, including from marginalized communities. At the end, I would like to say, now is the time. We need to act now.
Hello, Archana Soring there from India, an environmental activist. Now we're going to hear from another of our summit co-hosts and former COP president who secured that landmark Paris Agreement at COP21 5 years ago, and speaking live from Paris, President Emmanuel Macron of France. Mr. President, welcome.
Merci beaucoup, Zénab. Merci beaucoup. Merci, cher Antonio, cher secrétaire général, cher Boris, monsieur le Premier ministre, chers collègues, chers amis. Heureux de vous retrouver et malgré les circonstances de le faire depuis Paris où je suis accompagné par l'un des acteurs et des principaux architectes de l'accord, Laurent Fabius, et par deux ministres aujourd'hui en charge, Jean-Yves Le Drian et Barbara Pompili, pour montrer que l'action aussi continue. Merci de nous réunir comme c'était ainsi prévu 5 ans plus tard, après l'accord de Paris, pour montrer que notre action collective continue. Cet accord est un point de référence, le début de notre action à toutes et tous. Il a été parfois ballotté selon les choix des uns des autres, mais nous avons tenu. Et nous nous retrouvons dans un moment qui est important, quelques jours après que le président élu des États-Unis d'Amérique ait affirmé sa volonté de revenir dans l'accord de Paris. Et je veux vraiment dire « welcome back, welcome home » à nos amis américains. Durant les 3 dernières années, nous avons fait vivre cet accord de Paris et son esprit tous ensemble, malgré le choix américain, pour continuer à avancer, œuvrer avec tous les acteurs ici présents. Et je veux vraiment saluer la mobilisation européenne et la formidable coopération durant ces années avec la Chine. Nous n'avons pas beaucoup de temps devant nous et l'action doit être immédiate, nous le savons. D'abord, pour continuer d'être au rendez-vous, et nous ne sommes pas encore, je vais y revenir, et préparer la COP26 de Glasgow, sur laquelle nos amis britanniques sont tant et tant engagés. Je salue l'engagement de Boris Johnson. Le premier point que je voulais ici évoquer avec vous, c'est que nous devons nous donner une trajectoire et des moyens crédibles pour atteindre la neutralité carbone d'ici 2050. Et au fond, nous avons bâti ces points de passage avec des changements très clairs, des inflexions très claires, et nous devons avancer dans ce sens. Le secrétaire général des Nations Unies l'a rappelé, d'ici le mois prochain, les pays représentant plus de 65% des émissions mondiales de dioxyde de carbone et de plus de 70% de l'économie mondiale auront pris l'engagement de parvenir à 0 émission nette d'ici 2050. Je salue les engagements pris récemment par le Royaume-Uni, le Japon, la Corée du Sud. La Chine s'est engagée il y a quelques semaines à atteindre la neutralité carbone d'ici 2060 et je sais qu'aujourd'hui, le président Xi Jinping aura des annonces importantes à faire en ce sens pour rendre crédible ce mouvement. Et nous avons décidé, en Européens, il y a donc 2 jours, d'acter cette transition en prenant tous ensemble, à 27, l'engagement de réduire de 55% nos émissions de gaz à effet de serre d'ici à 2030 et de tous nous engager sur cet objectif de 2050. Nous aurons ensuite, pays par pays, à le décliner, et l'engagement européen est là, le Green Deal européen a été bâti, les financements européens sont aussi construits et nous continuerons d'avancer en ce sens. Le deuxième point, justement, c'est que nous devons réorienter massivement les flux financiers publics et privés pour les aligner avec les objectifs de l'accord de Paris. D'ores et déjà, 100% des projets financés par l'Agence française de développement sont aujourd'hui alignés avec l'accord de Paris. Avec nos partenaires européens, nous transformons la Banque européenne d'investissement pour en faire une véritable Banque européenne du climat. Il y a quelques semaines, lors du Forum de Paris pour la paix, ici même à Paris, les banques publiques de développement ont engagé la construction d'une nouvelle infrastructure financière publique globale, jamais conçue à cette échelle, pour permettre la réalisation concrète des objectifs de l'accord de Paris et des objectifs du développement durable. Nous devons continuer à accélérer et il y a un instant, je réunissais l'ensemble des acteurs de Finance Climat, Coalition pour la neutralité carbone 2050, où nous avons réuni l'ensemble des acteurs financiers de cette coalition qui s'était engagé le 12 décembre 2017 à Paris dans le cadre du One Planet Summit à justement avancer dans le cadre de l'agenda de l'accord de Paris pour améliorer la transparence financière des entreprises en matière de climat, pour décarboner les portefeuilles et décarboner l'économie. Et d'ores et déjà, les premiers résultats sont là avec la plateforme TCFD, les engagements en termes de transparence, de standards et la transformation qui a été faite par l'ensemble des places financières impliquant nos banques centrales, mais aussi les fonds souverains, les asset managers, les private equity. Troisièmement, nous devons, ça a été rappelé par le secrétaire général des Nations Unies, placer la lutte contre les inégalités au cœur de notre logiciel d'action. Nous devons le faire dans chacun de nos pays. Et notre transition écologique doit être une transition sociale. Et donc nous sommes en train de le faire grâce au plan de relance en France, au financement européen, mais toute notre transition est ainsi pensée et c'est une transformation profonde de nos économies, de nos fiscalités. Nous devons le faire aussi à l'échelle internationale, c'était l'objectif du Fonds vert. Nous avons coprésidé il y a quelques mois sa recapitalisation et l'an dernier, nous avons doublé la capitalisation du Fonds vert pour le climat. La France est au rendez-vous fixé Nous avons même dépassé les promesses faites il y a 5 ans, avec près de 6 milliards d'euros de financement climat mobilisés l'année dernière, dont 1,6 milliard pour l'adaptation. Et je veux ici vous dire 2 choses très claires et prendre ces engagements. Ce niveau d'engagement ambitieux que nous avons acté l'année dernière sera maintenu dans les prochaines années, donc en forte augmentation par rapport aux engagements. Et nous augmenterons la part dédiée à l'adaptation en le faisant passer à 1/3 de l'enveloppe globale. Parce que je partage ce que Antonio a dit tout à l'heure sur la nécessité de faire plus sur l'adaptation et la résilience. Quatrièmement, nous devons faire preuve de cohérence et de responsabilité. Nous avons pris en France, depuis 3 ans, des actions très fortes pour être justement en cohérence avec nos engagements internationaux. La fin de toutes les centrales thermiques à charbon, la fin de grands projets qui n'étaient pas compatibles avec notre agenda, des mesures profondes pour changer les modes de se chauffer, de se déplacer et investir massivement dans ce changement. Le plan de relance, ça a été dit par le secrétaire général, mais également par le Premier ministre Boris Johnson, le plan de relance de sortie Covid est un plan de relance profondément vert qui va nous permettre, par des investissements pour la rénovation thermique, pour le changement de véhicules, d'aller plus loin. Et nous aurons, dans les prochaines semaines, une loi climat nouvelle qui est l'émanation du travail fait par la Convention citoyenne pour le climat, 150 citoyens qui nous ont aidés à penser, qui ont proposé des solutions très concrètes pour aider à la transition de notre économie que nous mettrons en œuvre. L'année prochaine, plus aucune garantie publique française ne pourra être octroyée au profit des pétroles extra lourds, sable et schistes bitumineux. Et nous nous préparons dès maintenant à mettre fin, dans les 5 années qui viennent, à l'ensemble des soutiens à l'exploration et l'exploitation de nouveaux gisements pétroliers. Donner un prix au carbone, intégrer la dimension environnementale dans nos politiques commerciales, arrêter la construction de nouvelles centrales à charbon, rendre obligatoire la divulgation des risques financiers, supprimer progressivement les subventions dont bénéficient les combustibles fossiles, c'est ainsi que nous y arriverons, par cette cohérence. Et c'est ce qui est attendu, je crois, de l'ensemble des pays qui ici s'engagent. C'est ce que nous ferons en France, c'est ce que nous pousserons aussi en Europe, afin véritablement d'avoir aussi un prix du carbone et donc un schéma de transition qui nous permet d'être cohérents et d'avoir des résultats qui sont à la hauteur des engagements que nous prenons. Le Green Deal européen, dans lequel nous sommes profondément engagés, sera un point essentiel de cette stratégie. Voilà, merci pour votre attention. Nous serons tous ensemble engagés pour que la COP26 de Glasgow soit un succès, car l'enjeu est extrêmement important. Nous devons tous rehausser nos objectifs pour 2030, comme les Européens l'ont fait, avec le moins 55%. Nous devons tous être dans la trajectoire de la neutralité carbone 2050. C'est un devoir pour les pays les plus vulnérables de la planète aujourd'hui qui vivent les conséquences des erreurs passées. C'est un devoir pour notre jeunesse et les générations à venir. C'est un devoir pour nous-mêmes, car c'est la trace que notre génération laissera durablement dans l'histoire.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. That was, of course, the French President Emmanuel Macron live from Paris. So don't forget, you too can be part of this conversation. Just go to #ClimateAction on your social media channels and you can respond, discuss all the things that you're hearing today. So from France, we're going to go to Kenya now to hear from an activist who's based there in Kenya. She's a member of the Fair Trade International Board and also works for Oserian. Now, that's a labour organisation. And Mary's going to speak about the importance of government action to support farmers because, of course, we know they really are in the vanguard. They really are one of the most prominent groups who are affected by climate change. So, Mary, let's hear your message.
My name is Mary Kinyua. Greetings from Kenya. I'm Fair Trade Chair of Africa, and I have the honor of representing 1.7 million fair trade farmers and workers around the world. Our meeting today comes in the backdrop of 2 major hurricanes that have devastated Central America in the last 1 month. The farmers of fair trade who I work with and who I represent have seen their crops of coffee, cocoa, honey, and vegetables in Honduras, Guatemala, and Nicaragua be completely devastated. So as a matter of justice and a matter of science action, the matter of climate crisis cannot be delayed any longer. There is hope. More and more companies are talking to us about how they want us to reduce emissions and reach net zero. But we're not going fast enough. change by 2050 is too late. The weather is changing now. Doing this properly means helping farmers and workers with the cost of switching to low carbon production and transport. And that cannot happen if we're not prepared to pay for it. We cannot expect, and it is not fair to expect producers to absorb the cost of more sustainable methods of farming when they're not even able to earn a living income or a living wage because the price they receive for their produce is far too low. This needs to change, and needs to change fast. So governments need to act to make this happen. So here is your challenge from the world's farmer. Will you work now, harder than ever, to bring down supply chain emotions, to set targets, and to take steps to support and, if need be, compel businesses to decarbonize their supply chain? At today's Ambition Summit, and the work we will do together over the next 1 year, we hope will result in co-op that puts us firmly on the path to net zero. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed there to Mary Kinyua with her message from Kenya on behalf of farmers all over the world. So now I'd like to welcome the COP25 President and partner of this Climate Ambition Summit, Sebastián Piñera, President of Chile. And Mr. President is speaking live from Santiago. And Chile hosted, of course, the COP25 on climate last year in Madrid. And you continue to work very closely with the UK presidency in the run-up to COP26. And Mr. Piñera, you are joined, we can see him there, Iván Duque, the President of the Republic of Colombia. And we're going to be hearing from President Duque a little later in our summit. But now let's hear from you first. President Piñera, live from Santiago. Thank you.
Antonio, Boris, Emmanuel, Giuseppe, good morning, good evening, my dear friends. Bonjour, bonsoir, mes chers amis. La amenaza del calentamiento global es real, es grave y es ahora. La ciencia nos ha hablado en forma fuerte y clara. La ciudadanía, y especialmente la juventud, nos exige un cambio de rumbo, como un imperativo moral. Pero también hay buenas noticias. La tecnología, la ciencia, nos provee las herramientas y el sentido común nos urge a la acción. En consecuencia, tenemos que recuperar el equilibrio entre la vida humana y la naturaleza en el planeta Tierra, porque nuestra sobrevivencia depende de la salud del planeta Tierra. El tiempo de los diagnósticos ya pasó. Llegó el tiempo de la acción. Por eso hoy Chile está orgulloso de convocar junto al Reino Unido, Francia, Italia y las Naciones Unidas a la conmemoración de este 5º aniversario del Acuerdo de París y a revivir su espíritu, su fuerza, su sentido de urgencia. Hace 5 años tomamos la decisión como comunidad internacional de enfrentar con voluntad y urgencia la amenaza del cambio climático. Sin duda es el desafío más grande que hemos enfrentado como generación. Y en París todos demostramos que cuando existe voluntad política, el multilateralismo, la colaboración entre los países es un instrumento poderoso para avanzar hacia un desarrollo inclusivo y sostenible, que es el único desarrollo posible en estos tiempos. Hoy necesitamos nuevamente esa misma voluntad política y sentido de urgencia, con una nueva ambición climática, porque los peligros y las amenazas lo exigen. Porque si queremos mantener el aumento de la temperatura del planeta por debajo de 1,5 grados, las emisiones actuales de carbono deben reducirse por lo menos en un 45%, casi a la mitad, en los próximos 10 años. Y tenemos que alcanzar la carbono neutralidad antes del año 2050. Pero una mirada ambiciosa no consiste solo en reducir emisiones. También tenemos que aumentar nuestros esfuerzos para la adaptación a las consecuencias del cambio climático que ya están aquí y que las percibe y las sufre todo el mundo y continuarán agravándose. Hoy tenemos que recordar que el Acuerdo de París es solo un primer paso, un comienzo, un compromiso, una hoja de ruta para contrarrestar la enorme concentración de gases de efecto invernadero que nosotros hemos provocado en la atmósfera y para avanzar con rapidez hacia la carbono neutralidad a nivel global. Y la única manera de lograrlo es por medio de esfuerzos nacionalmente determinados que sean proporcionales a las capacidades y responsabilidades de cada país. Por ello, en la cumbre del secretario general de Naciones Unidas del año pasado, Chile lanzó el Climate Ambition Alliance para alcanzar la carbono neutralidad antes del 2050. Comenzamos con un grupo de 6 países en el G20 de Osaka. Hoy ya son más de 123 países, 1.400 empresas, 500 ciudades, 570 universidades y más de 5 trillones de dólares que se están invirtiendo para este propósito. Estamos comprometidos con la campaña Race to Zero, que aumenta la ambición y urgencia para cumplir con estas metas. Las metas de París, a través de la unión entre el Estado y la sociedad civil. Chile ha logrado avances muy significativos. En abril de este año presentamos una nueva NDCs, más ambiciosa y basada en la ciencia. Nuestro compromiso incluye un pic de emisiones a más tardar el 2025 y se basa en medidas concretas, como el cierre de todas las centrales de carbón, como la electrificación de todo nuestro sistema de transporte público antes del 2040. Y también incluye un enorme esfuerzo para reforestar y proteger nuestros bosques y proteger nuestros océanos. Este compromiso se materializa en que el 30% de nuestra tierra y el 30% de nuestros mares estarán bajo protección. Y todo esto con un solo objetivo fundamental: alcanzar la carbono neutralidad antes del 2050. Hoy quiero hacer un llamado a los jefes de Estado y de Gobierno aquí presentes. Todos debemos avanzar con decisión hacia modelos de desarrollo que sean bajos en emisiones y comprometernos con emisiones netas cero lo antes posible. El presidente electo de Estados Unidos ha anunciado que Estados Unidos vuelve al Acuerdo de París, de donde nunca debió haber salido. Y esta es sin duda una gran noticia, pero no es suficiente. Por eso esperamos que Estados Unidos también se comprometa con la carbono neutralidad, tal como lo han hecho en los últimos días y semanas países como China, Japón y Brasil. Esta semana le envié una invitación al presidente electo Biden para sumarse a este Climate Ambition Alliance y alcanzar juntos la carbono neutralidad antes del 2050. Porque todos tenemos que hacer muchos esfuerzos para lograrlo. Tenemos que convertir al siglo XXI en el siglo de la descarbonización y de las energías limpias y renovables. Es un imperativo ético, es una obligación moral. La pandemia del COVID ha significado un tremendo golpe a nuestras economías, a nuestras ciudadanías, a nuestra capacidad de crecimiento, a la salud y a la calidad de vida de nuestros pueblos. Algunos están planteando un falso dilema entre la recuperación económica y la protección del medio ambiente. Este desafío es una tremenda oportunidad para que invirtamos cumpliendo con ambos objetivos: avanzar hacia la carbono neutralidad y recuperar nuestras economías y nuestros empleos. Una recuperación verde, sana, resiliente, sostenible. Porque en los meses que vienen, las políticas que impulsemos los gobiernos para la recuperación de nuestras economías van a marcar la ruta de la transición hacia un mundo más sustentable. En Chile hemos establecido que gran parte de ese esfuerzo de recuperación esté asociado a una economía verde, renovable y limpia. Durante la COP25 pusimos la ciencia en el corazón de la toma de decisiones y la adaptación en el centro de la discusión para los países, especialmente los que somos los más vulnerables al cambio climático. Y hemos incluido nuevos temas, como la protección y manejo sustentable de los océanos, de los bosques, generando espacios de discusión, trabajando sin descanso en la promoción de esta mayor ambición y colaboración. Estamos viviendo tiempos de grandes desafíos, pero también de grandes esperanzas. Hace mucho tiempo que el planeta Tierra nos está dando gritos de angustia y está pidiendo nuestro compromiso. Y nuestra generación tiene la misión de hacer sostenible la vida humana en el planeta Tierra. Y para ello es necesario crear una nueva cultura de vida sustentable, abandonar la cultura de lo desechable y abrazar la cultura de lo reciclable. Y esto requiere transformar nuestra matriz energética hacia energías limpias y renovables. Chile está 100% comprometido y está, en cierta forma, liderando la revolución del hidrógeno verde, que nos permite mirar con mayor fe y optimismo el futuro. Nuestra generación tiene un deber. We must become the responsible ancestors of future generations. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, President Piñera of Chile, speaking live there from the capital, Santiago. Next, to speak is the partner for COP26 and the Climate Ambition Summit, Giuseppe Conte, President of the Council of Ministers of Italy. Now, Italy is going to be holding a number of key events in preparation for COP26 next year. For example, in September 2021, it's going to be hosting a youth COP, which is going to be bringing together 400 young people from 197 countries. I think that must be just about every country in the world. And it's going to give them a chance to really develop concrete proposals that they want to support the negotiations at COP26 in Glasgow. And Italy is also going to be hosting the pre-COP summit, which is a really important moment to bring together ministers ahead of that climate conference. And so, Giuseppe Conte, live from Rome. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, Antonio, Boris, Emmanuel, Sebastian, distinguished guests, 5 years ago in Paris, our countries adopted a landmark agreement committed to strengthen the global response to the existential threat of climate change. Despite our efforts since that day, the world continues to face the rise of global emission and temperature at an alarming rate. The pressure is even higher now as we collectively plan our recovery from the damages caused by the global pandemic. However, in front of this huge challenge, we have the opportunity to build back greener and better. The scientific community tells us that we are still in time to reverse the course of our future, provided that we proceed with unprecedented determination. But we must act now to safeguard our planet, restore biodiversity and ecosystems, and ensure a sustainable future which belongs to the young generations more than to us. As a 2021 G20 presidency and partner of the UK for COP26, Italy is committed to give an important contribution to this common endeavor. We want to use our special responsibility next year to enable ambitious, forward-looking agreements within the framework of the 3 Rio Conventions on climate, biodiversity, and desertification. The impact of the pandemic on our social and economic system should not affect our determination to address these challenges through new and ambitious nationally determined contributions, long-term strategies, and the realignment of global financial flows to tackle mitigation and adaptation. As a founding and active member of the European Union, we are proud of its leadership in the fight against climate change. Especially today, following yesterday's decision by the European Council for an NDC aimed at reducing emissions by at least 55% by 2030. But both nationally and as an EU member, we are also firmly committed to long-term strategies setting out a pathway to net zero emissions by 2050. Therefore, we encourage the start of a race to reach net zero across major global economies. International climate finance will play a key role in achieving these objectives. We stay firm in the global commitment to deliver $100 billion by 2020 to support developing economies in reaching our shared climate goals. Climate change is the most vulnerable first and hardest. Italy has always paid special attention to their need to strengthen their resilience to current and future climate impacts. This is why I'm proud to announce Italy's pledge to donate 30 million euros to the United Nations Adaptation Fund. Our planet is one of the key components of the Italian G20 presidency, together with people and prosperity. The well-being of our common house is the first essential step to ensure the well-being of humanity. Today, and I conclude, in the fifth anniversary of the Paris Agreement, we need to show leadership, reminding that our actions will resonate loudly in the rest of the world. Thank you.
Grazie to Giuseppe Conte, the President of the Council of Ministers of Italy, and making a pledge there to contribute to the United Nations Climate Adaptation Fund. So we're now going to hear from another grassroots activist, from Selina Neyrock Lim. Now, she's a youth representative from Majuro in the Marshall Islands. Now, Selina was one of the global faces of climate change at COP21, that landmark COP21 in Paris. And in fact, at that time, she was the summit's youngest delegate. And today, Selina has a really urgent call to action for all of us, and she wants to set out what needs to be done over the next decade to meet the goals of that Paris Agreement. So let's hear from Selina.
It has been 5 years since the Paris Agreement, and what a tumultuous time it has been. The ever-rising global temperatures have penetrated the world even more acutely. It is the melting of permafrost, forest fires that hit closer to the home of the climate crisis deniers, droughts that ransack living beings of their resources, floods that reminded many of us that we have no escape. All of these felt immensely by those that society continues to minoritize and exclude from the climate crisis discussions when it entails our very livelihood and survival. With the eco-anxiety felt worldwide that at times fears me into immobility, I keep sight that we have until 2030 to radicalize movements, eliminate fossil fuel in favor of renewable energy, live eco-consciously in our personal lives, evaluate our food systems, remove artificial barriers in order to efficiently and fairly allocate funds to countries and communities severely affected. Back in 2015, I sat down with former Minister Tony de Bruyn as we delivered our statement thinking my home had till 2050. This is the decade of action. I stand with the anger and disappointment of my youth comrades towards you, the 1% elite of the world, for with the massive influence you have, you failed your big shoes. I stand with the resilience and desperation of my youth comrades, for we have united across the globe to fight for our livelihoods. We demand what needs and must be done. I celebrate the Paris Agreement because my predecessors fought hard to get our 1.5 degrees Celsius lifeline into it. Yet, I also remind all of us how much we haven't done. We mobilize on social ground to bridge the gap to political ground in order to make our goals effective. Komol, thank you.
So Selina there, described as a climate warrior, talking to us from the Marshall Islands. Now, thank you to Selina. Throughout this Climate Ambition Summit, you can tune into our on-demand content on climate, and that's on climateambitionsummit2020.org. And you can also hear from lots of climate activists and experts. So really do urge you to go there and join in today's conversations on your social media channels. Just use the hashtag Climate Action. Now we're going to show you another film from the WWF team and those behind the latest David Attenborough film. And this looks at the current state of our world. And it's a world that is seen as being currently out of balance, and it's full of expert opinion, and it's also telling us how this whole debate is driven by fact. So let us see our next film.
We have the data. As a scientific community, we have the data. Now we must act.
Ease down. The car is heating up. It's going to explode. We can't get out.
We're approaching tipping points which could result in irreversible changes.
Join the dots. It's happening. It's happening in your world. It's happening in my world. And let's be very clear about this. It is going to get much worse.
If drastic measures aren't taken right now to arrest the warming of the planet, the world we know today won't exist in 50 years. A report from the United Nations has made the stark prediction.
What we do between 2020 and 2030, from the evidence we have today, my conclusion is it will be the decisive decade for humanity's future on Earth.
It is expensive to not deal with climate change, and if we do not act now, these costs will only grow. There can be up to 60 million jobs that could be created as a result of a more green economy.
The cost of renewables around the world has absolutely plummeted. Renewables are bringing new, clean jobs to communities. We're seeing a new industrial revolution.
Changing the way we grow our crops and the crops we grow, we can definitely mitigate the changing climate.
We need to stop burning fossil fuels. That means we need to stop selling or buying vehicles that cannot run on renewable energy.
We have 17,000 public buses and 22,000 taxis. And in 2017 and 2018, they became electric. The whole environment, the climate, the sky and everything is tremendous as well. You know, we have a lot of blue skies. The air is a lot cleaner, so walking around the city feels a lot more comfortable.
Natural ecosystems across the globe completely regulate our carbon cycle, and in doing so, they regulate the climate.
These ecosystems are really important for fighting climate change. In fact, they're one of the most intense carbon sinks on the planet.
The most promising side of this is that we're seeing sustainability as the entry point for innovation, technology, and business.
I'm quite optimistic. There are so many people across this planet who know how devastating climate change is. Just imagine if all those people start acting. I actually think we've got a chance.
Addressing climate change and saving the world, people may think that that's not something that they have the power to do. But we do. We have the power to do it.
So that film there, looking at the state of our climate today, but also exploring the positive opportunities for the future and that we can make change. All right, so we're going to have a little bit of a change here. I'm going to tell you in advance we're going to have a collection of world leaders who are going to be coming forward with their new ambitious commitments on climate action at this Climate Ambition Summit. And they all hope that this is going to help deliver the whole world on a greener, more resilient and sustainable path. So first we're going to hear from President Xi Jinping of the People's Republic of China. And then we're going live to the European Union, where we're going to be joined by the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, and the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. And then we'll hear from Mia Mottley, who's the Prime Minister of Barbados, and then Uhuru Kenyatta in Kenya, the President of the Republic of Kenya. And then we go to India, to Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister there. And then Ivan Duque Marquez, the President of the Republic of Colombia. Remember, we got a glimpse of him, but we didn't hear him when he was next to President Piñera. And then we're going to go to Pakistan, to the Prime Minister there, Imran Khan. And then we're going to hear from His Holiness Pope Francis. So let us start then with President Xi Jinping.
尊敬的古特雷斯秘书长先生，尊敬的各位同事，很高兴出席今天的气候雄心峰会。5年前，各国领导人以最大的政治决心和智慧推动达成应对气候变化巴黎协定。5年来，巴黎协定进入实施阶段，得到国际社会广泛支持和参与。当前国际格局加速演变，新冠肺炎疫情触发对人与自然关系的深刻反思，全球气候治理的未来更受关注。在此，我提3点倡议：第一，团结一心，开创合作共赢的气候治理新局面。在气候变化挑战面前，人类命运与共，单边主义没有出路。我们只有坚持多边主义，讲团结，促合作，才能互利共赢，福泽各国人民。中方欢迎各国支持巴黎协定，为应对气候变化做出更大贡献。第二，提振雄心，形成各尽所能的气候治理新体系。各国应该遵循共同但有区别的责任原则，根据国情和能力，最大程度强化行动。同时，发达国家要切实加大向发展中国家提供资金、技术、能力建设支持。第三，增强信心，坚持绿色复苏的气候治理新思路。绿水青山就是金山银山。要大力倡导绿色低碳的生产生活方式，从绿色发展中寻找发展的机遇和动力。中国为达成应对气候变化巴黎协定作出重要贡献，也是落实巴黎协定的积极践行者。今年9月，我宣布中国将提高国家自主贡献力度，采取更加有力的政策和措施，力争2030年前二氧化碳排放达到峰值，努力争取2060年前实现碳中和。在此，我愿进一步宣布，到2030年，中国单位国内生产总值二氧化碳排放将比2005年下降 65以上，非化石能源占一次能源消费比重将达到25%左右，森林蓄积量将比2005年增加60亿立方米，风电、太阳能发电总装机容量将达到12亿千瓦以上。中国历来重信守诺，将以新发展理念为引领，在推动高质量发展中，促进经济社会发展全面绿色转型，脚踏实地落实上述目标，为全球应对气候变化做出更大贡献。各位同事，天不言而40行，地不语而百物生。地球是人类共同的唯一的家园，让我们继往开来，并肩前行，助力巴黎协定行稳致远，开启全球应对气候变化新征程。谢谢大家。
Your wife.
Cher Antonio, cher Boris, cher Emmanuel, cher Sébastien et chers amis, 5 ans depuis les accords de Paris, et je suis depuis Bruxelles heureux de vous retrouver de manière virtuelle, porteur d'une bonne nouvelle, d'un message fort. Hier, les 27 leaders européens se sont réunis et ont pris un engagement ambitieux, clair, précis. C'est l'ambition de réduire de 55% au minimum nos émissions à l'horizon 2030. Il y a 1 an, exactement, au mois de décembre 2019, nous nous engagions pour la neutralité climat en 2050. Nous allons rester totalement mobilisés parce qu'il s'agit pour nous d'un changement complet de paradigme. Et c'est le sens aussi de l'accord financier qui a été trouvé sur le plan européen. 1800 milliards d'euros seront mobilisés tout au long des prochaines années, dont 30% minimum sera dédicacé pour relever ce défi du changement climatique. Pour nous, c'est un projet de société, c'est un projet de prospérité qui se traduit dans le cadre de cet European Green Deal, qui est une batterie de mesures ambitieuses afin de développer l'innovation, de soutenir des emplois, de relever le cadre de vie. Nous voulons aussi agir sur le terrain diplomatique. Nous savons que la mobilisation multilatérale, la coopération internationale sera clé, et c'est en cela que systématiquement, que ce soit en matière de partenariats économiques, de partenariats commerciaux, nous voulons encourager tous nos partenaires dans le monde à rejoindre cette même ambition. Il y a un défi pour notre génération, celui de mettre en avant toute notre intelligence collective, de mettre en avant toute notre détermination pour faire en sorte d'être à la hauteur de ce défi, à la hauteur pour marquer notre respect, notre considération pour l'humanité et pour les générations qui nous suivent.
Dear guests of the Climate Ambition Summit, 55%. That is now indeed Europe's calling card. I'm glad that the 27 European leaders have signed up to the European Commission's proposal for taking climate action to a new level of ambition. Together with the arrangement on our next 7-year budget, the 55% agreement is a go-ahead for scaling up climate action across our economy and society. We have already started, from boosting renewable energy, creating hydrogen valleys, and producing the most sustainable batteries, to launching a wave of building innovation, decarbonizing transport, and protecting and restoring our nature. We are serious about getting our economy on a more sustainable path. But this isn't a task for Europe alone. Europe only accounts for less than 10% of global emissions. Climate change is more than a European issue. It is a human issue. And today there is a global movement for climate action, a movement that counts on powerful nations, but also on countless cities, NGOs, people of goodwill. Europe wants to contribute to the movement and make it grow. We want to work with all those who agree that we must put a price on carbon. We are ready for more ambitious commitments with like-minded countries. And we are supporting developing countries to help them decouple their emissions and their economic growth, just like we are doing in Europe. And it is more than cutting emissions. It is about green finance. It is about restoring biodiversity. It is about a new circular economy that creates jobs and prosperity while preserving nature. Many things have to change so that our planet can remain the same for the next generation. 55% is Europe's contribution on the road to Glasgow. Let's walk this road together.
Fellow leaders and colleagues, I'm honored to speak at this Climate Ambition Summit 5 years after the world came together in Paris and embraced a solution to the climate crisis that included, and I quote, 1.5 to stay alive, unquote. That is the mantra you must know of small island developing states like Barbados. Our optimism and joy in Paris now seems short-lived. Global greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise unabated, and our window to end the crisis is closing. As I speak, the 30th named storm of this record-setting hurricane season has ripped through Latin America, while COVID-19 related debt is consuming our resources, some that was intended for climate mitigation, I might add. Barbados's new nationally determined contribution of becoming fossil fuel free by 2030 at best and carbon neutral at worst is an even more ambitious target than that of 2015. My government has created the enabling environment for this transition through legislation, incentives, and empowering Barbadian citizens to participate in our energy revolution. Our vision is that by 2030, most Barbadian homes will have solar PV panels on their roofs and an electric vehicle in their garage. Despite our efforts, the fact is that the level of mitigation ambition contained in your NDCs will determine the fate of countries like my own. For unless the climate crisis is addressed, there will be no Build Back Better for countries and economies like mine. Frankly, at the global level, we need to move from placatory rhetoric to real, effective action, or numerous nations across the world will be robbed of their future. I would like to believe that the major emitters are not capable of what would, in essence, be close to climate genocide. I'd like to believe that we are visible and indispensable for them. Let us therefore together act on the responsibility which the climate crisis imposes on all nations and all peoples. The time is now. I thank you.
Your Excellencies, I'm delighted for the opportunity to articulate Kenya's position in this event, which marks the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, to rally much-needed greater climate action and ambition. Your Excellencies, Kenya, just like other vulnerable countries, is experiencing frequent and intense bouts of drought and torrential rains, leading to floods with far-reaching consequences on communities, ecosystems, and infrastructure. It is estimated that the loss associated with these natural calamities could be as high as 3% of GDP annually. So notwithstanding the challenges we as a country are faced with because of COVID-19 pandemic, we are still on schedule to update our NDC before the 31st of December this year, which was the deadline. Our first NDC had set a 30% emission reduction by 2030. Our updated NDC commits to abate greenhouse gas emissions by 32% by 2030, which is in line with our Sustainable Development Agenda and our national circumstances. The time frame set for the implementation of the NDC is up to 2030, with milestones targeted in 2025. To implement the required mitigation and adaptation actions in the updated NDC, we will require approximately $62 million between 2020 and 2030, broken down as follows: mitigation, $18 million, and adaptation, $44 million. Our first NDC was fully conditional to international support. However, for our updated NDC, Kenya commits to support 20% of the mitigation budget from our domestic resources and seeks the international support for the balance. As countries around the world continue to rebuild their economies and communities during the COVID-19 pandemic, my government commits to building back better in ways that increase resilience to future health and climate shocks. And I am happy to announce that Kenya has commenced the process of developing its climate change and development long-term strategy, and in this regard, my government is demonstrating leadership by being among the first in Africa to develop an LTS. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude my remarks, it is my hope and expectation that the G20 countries and large corporations, which collectively account for more than 80% of global emissions and 85% of the global economy, will announce ambitious NDCs and long-term strategies. Without these ambitious announcements, the race to 2030 and the 2050 Paris Agreement targets will be futile. In this regard, I wish to salute those countries and corporations that have already made ambitious targets. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Excellencies, this summit marks the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, the most ambitious step in our fight against climate change. Today, as we are looking to set our sights even higher, we must also not lose sight of the past. We must not only revise our ambitions, but also review our achievements against targets already set. Only then can our voices be credible for future generations. Excellencies, I must humbly share with you that India is not only on track to achieve its Paris Agreement targets, but to exceed them beyond expectations. We have reduced our emission intensity by 21% over 2005 levels. Our solar capacity has grown from 2.63 gigawatts in 2014 to 36 gigawatts in 2020. Our renewable energy capacity is the 4th largest in the world. It will reach 175 gigawatts before 2022. And we have an even more ambitious target now, 450 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2030. We have also succeeded in expanding our forest cover and safeguarding our biodiversity. And on the world stage, India has pioneered two major initiatives: the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Excellencies, in 2047, India will celebrate 100 years as a modern, independent nation. To all my fellow residents of this planet, I make a solemn pledge today. Centennial India will not only meet its own targets, but will also exceed your expectations. Thank you. Thank you very much.
El cambio climático es uno de los grandes temas de nuestra era, de nuestra generación, de nuestro momento. Todos tenemos que unirnos para tomar acciones concretas para mitigar y para enfrentar sus devastadores efectos. Colombia representa el 0.4% de las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero, pero es uno de los países más expuestos a los efectos del cambio climático. Por eso, nosotros queremos jugar un papel de liderazgo regional y mundial, con acciones claras y concretas que muestren nuestro compromiso indeclinable. Hoy, quiero anunciar de manera muy clara que Colombia se ha trazado una meta, y es que de cara al año 2030 reduzcamos las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero en un 51% con respecto al año de referencia, que es el año 2010. Esto significa que trabajaremos con todos los sectores para lograr ese objetivo, que seguiremos apuntándole a una transición energética dinámica con energías renovables no convencionales, que profundizaremos la movilidad eléctrica, que seguiremos haciendo una política pública para sembrar millones de árboles en nuestro territorio. Nuestra meta es sembrar 180 millones de árboles para el año 2022 y este año superaremos los 50 millones de árboles. Esperamos seguir reduciendo la tasa de deforestación, profundizar también el concepto de economía circular y que además en cada ciudadano haya una conciencia para reducir nuestra huella individual a través de reducir, reciclar y reutilizar. Y que todos los sectores de la producción asuman también el compromiso de producir conservando y conservar produciendo. Que avancemos en el Pacto de Leticia, en la protección de los ecosistemas de alta montaña o páramos, y que tengamos también la plena certeza que en el sector de la producción rural debemos mirar cada vez más hacia los esquemas silvopastoriles y debemos tener una producción soportada y sustentada por el criterio y el concepto de la armonía indeclinable con la naturaleza. Esta meta que se traza Colombia es importante, es definitiva y marcará el rumbo de lo que nos queda de nuestro gobierno y las próximas 2 administraciones. Prepararnos y enfrentar el cambio climático no está sujeto a arbitrios ideológicos ni tampoco a teorías partidistas. Es un reto del mundo, de nuestra generación, y que nuestro país lo asume con amor profundo por ser uno de los países con mayor biodiversidad por kilómetro cuadrado en el planeta. Tenemos costas en los 2 océanos, tenemos el 35% de nuestro territorio en Amazonía y el 50% en selva tropical húmeda. Hoy, con este compromiso, Colombia traza una hoja de ruta y quiere llegar a la COP26 a mostrarle al mundo que, a pesar de representar el 0.4% de las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero, un compromiso de reducción del 51% muestra que queremos trascender. Muchísimas gracias.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mr. Chairperson, Pakistan is the country whose contribution to global emissions is less than 1%. Yet, and sadly, we are the 5th most vulnerable country to climate change. We have decided, firstly, that we will have nature-based solutions to mitigate the effects of climate change. First, by planting 10 billion trees in the next 3 years. Secondly, we have increased the number of national parks, protected areas, from 30 to 45. At the same time, we have decided that we will not have any more power based on coal. We have already scrapped 2 coal power projects, which were supposed to produce 2,600 megawatts of energy, and replaced it by hydroelectricity. As far as our indigenous coal goes, we have decided to look for produce energy either by coal to liquid or coal to gas, so that we do not have to burn coal to produce energy. At the same time, we've also decided that by 2030, 60% of all energy produced in Pakistan will be clean energy through renewables. And also, 30% of all our vehicles would be on electricity. So I assure you that Pakistan will be doing its best to make its contribution to mitigate the effects of climate change. Thank you.
La actual pandemia y el cambio climático, que tienen una relevancia no solo ambiental, sino también ética, social, económica y política, inciden sobre todo en la vida de los más pobres y frágiles. De este modo, apelan a nuestra responsabilidad de promover, con un compromiso colectivo y solidario, una cultura del cuidado que ponga en el centro la dignidad humana y el bien común. Además de adoptar algunas medidas que no pueden aplazarse más, es necesaria una estrategia que reduzca a cero las emisiones netas. La Santa Sede se asocia a este objetivo moviéndose en 2 planos. Primero, por una parte, el Estado de la Ciudad del Vaticano se compromete a reducir a cero las emisiones netas antes del 2050, intensificando los esfuerzos de gestión ambiental ya en curso desde hace algunos años, que posibilitan el uso racional de recursos naturales como el agua y la energía, la eficacia energética, la movilidad sostenible, la reforestación y la economía circular también en la gestión de los desechos. Segundo, por otra parte, la Santa Sede se compromete a promover una educación para la ecología integral. Las medidas políticas y técnicas deben unirse con un proceso educativo que favorezca un modelo cultural de desarrollo y de sostenibilidad centrado en la fraternidad y en la alianza entre ser humano y ambiente. En esta perspectiva, he inaugurado el Pacto Educativo Global para acompañar a las escuelas y universidades católicas frecuentadas por más de 70 millones de estudiantes en todos los continentes, y he apoyado la economía de Francisco, a través de la cual jóvenes economistas, empresarios, expertos en finanzas y en el mundo del trabajo promueven nuevos caminos que superan la pobreza energética, que pongan el cuidado de los bienes comunes en el centro de las políticas nacionales e internacionales y que favorezcan la producción sostenible también en países con baja renta, compartiendo tecnologías avanzadas apropiadas. Ha llegado el momento de un cambio de rumbo. No robemos a las nuevas generaciones la esperanza en un futuro mejor. Gracias.
So Pope Francis there ending that collection of world leaders you heard there making their pledges, and he talked about how he wants to promote ecological education in all Catholic teaching establishments. All right, so next we're going to hear from the chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and that's Hoi Sung Lee. But before we hear from him, we're going to see the first of a series of case studies of films. And this one looks at climate adaptation. Now, we're used to hearing a great deal about mitigation, policies that mitigate climate change. But the other side of the coin is adaptation and building resilience. And that's what this film looks at is how we can build adaptation in communities around the world.
থেকে আসে আর তলার আসে মালগুলো নিয়ে তাতে আমরা ভালো ভালো লাভবান হই। আমার এলাকা খুব নিচু, 3 মাস শুকনো থাকে আর 9 মাসই থাকে পানি। তখন আমরা অকার্য অবস্থায় পড়ে থাকি। তখন এই ধাপ চাষটাই আমরা আমাদের বাপদাদা করছে, তা আমরা এটা অনেক ভাবে আমরা করছি, যেহেতু আমরা এতে অনেক লাভবান হচ্ছি। এই ধাপ আমাদের কোনো 5 দিন বর্ষাও যদি ঢালও নামে আমাদের এই ধাপ কোনো ক্ষয়ক্ষতি হয় না, যেহেতু এই ধাপের কারণে আমরা
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, thank you for this invitation. I was in Paris for COP21 and saw how governments reached an agreement based on the findings of the IPCC's 5th assessment report. Science tells us that climate is already changing because of human activity. We are currently on a path risking serious, pervasive, and irreversible impacts. But science also shows us that the pathways that can lead to a sustainable and prosperous future. In Paris, you also asked the IPCC for a report on global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius. The report tells us that the climate change is already affecting people and nature around the world. Limiting warming to 1.5 degrees is not impossible, but would mean unprecedented transitions in all aspects of society. There are clear benefits to keeping warming to 1.5 rather than 2 degrees. Stabilizing the climate is compatible with other goals like sustainable development and eradicating poverty. Our last 3 special reports show that the need and possibility for urgent action are clear. Governments are responding to these findings with new commitments, which are not yet enough to keep warming below 1.5 degrees. And we look forward to hearing stronger commitments today in line with climate science. Science continues to advance, and the IPCC is working on the 6th assessment report despite the many challenges. We will have more knowledge to share at COP26 and beyond. But you already know enough to act today. Thank you.
So that's Hoisung Lee there, chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, reminding us about how, when we talk about projections of future warming and the impacts, the science is there, of course, but it's also there to tell us about what kind of solutions we can undertake and how this helps to maximize growth in so many things, improved health, in jobs, and providing us with food security and also alleviating poverty. And we know that these targets will be most effective when they are backed by evidence-based plans, the data to really deliver them. So now we're going to hear from another collection of world leaders. Let me tell you who they are. We've got Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, Premier Ministre du Canada. and he's going to be followed by Ibrahim Mohammed Soleh, President of the Republic of Maldives. And then we have the Honorable Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. And then staying in Asia, we go to Yoshihide Suga, the Prime Minister of Japan. Then we go to Argentina, to the President there, Alberto Fernandez. And then Dr. Lotte Schering, the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Bhutan. And then we're also going to hear from two governors in the United States, and they are Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, and Charlie Baker, who's the governor of Massachusetts. Because, of course, what happens at local government, state level, is also very, very important. So it's good that we can hear from two people representing that arm of government. So let us start with Justin Trudeau. Thank you.
Right now, all of our countries are dealing with the health and economic impacts of the global pandemic. But as we look to rebuilding from this crisis, we must do so in a way that will build back better for all of our citizens. And that must include an ambitious plan to take strong action against climate change. Le mois dernier, nous avons déposé un projet de loi qui va nous permettre d'atteindre notre objectif de carboneutralité d'ici 2050 et d'imposer au prochain gouvernement la responsabilité d'atteindre la même cible. Et hier, on a présenté notre nouveau plan d'action ambitieux pour le climat qui nous permettra de dépasser nos objectifs climatiques de 2030. We will raise our emission reduction ambitions. And in partnership with provinces and territories, we, as a country, will strive for the upper end of a range of 32 to 40% below 2005 levels by 2030. We will raise Canada's price on carbon pollution, rising by $15 a tonne starting in 2023 and rising to 170 Canadian dollars per tonne by 2030. And we will remain committed to making significant investments in international climate finance, because to effectively fight climate change at home, we must fight it everywhere. This pandemic has taught us the importance of global cooperation, and we must translate that lesson to how we deal with the climate crisis, because our kids and grandkids are counting on us.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The Maldives is among the most vulnerable countries to the impacts of climate change. We want our ambition to meet the full scale of this challenge and to be a leader in reducing carbon emissions. With the current assistance and resources available, we are on track to reduce a quarter of our emissions by 2030. While this is a positive start, we believe we have a responsibility to take a more transformational economic and environmental path. That is why we aim to reach net zero by 2030 on the condition we receive the extensive support we need. To reach this goal, we will need the realization of the financial and technical assistance that has been pledged to countries such as ours over many decades. We will continue to work towards our long-term strategy of net zero by initiatives such as increasing the percentage of renewable energy used for power generation and exploring alternative solutions to reduce our emissions, including through stronger incentives and legislation. The Maldives will do all that it can to address the climate emergency. We call on the international community to do the same and provide access, especially to SIDS, for much needed consistent financial assistance so that we can meet our targets and secure a 1.5-degree world. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The Right Honorable Boris Johnson, Excellencies, today we are observing the 5th anniversary of the historic Paris Agreement. Unfortunately, we are nowhere near to our goals set under the agreement. The reality is that the climate change is neither going to take a break nor it will spare us from its adverse impact for our inaction. Despite many constraints, Bangladesh has emerged as a global leader on adaptation measures. In this regard, I would like to remind everyone that there is a limit to adaptation. As the president of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, we have launched the CVF Midnight Survival Deadline for the Climate initiative, urging every country to declare enhanced NDCs by the midnight on 31st December 2020. In Bangladesh, we are planting 11.5 million saplings nationwide, marking the birth centenary of our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and also launched a program called Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan to mobilize resources for a secured, sustainable future. To substantially rise our NDC and adaptation ambition, we have further included a few more potential sectors in addition to the existing energy, industry, and transport sectors in the mitigation process. We are also finalizing our national adaptation plan. Every year, we are spending $2 billion for climate change sensitive projects and $3 billion for adaptation measures. I would like to conclude urging all developed countries to come forward with predictable and promised mitigation measures along with climate finance. Thank you all.
日本国内閣総理大臣の菅義偉です。はじめに会議を主催されるジョンソン首相、マクロン大統領、グテーレス国連事務総長の指導力に敬意を表します。本日、気候野心サミットで日本の取り組みについてお話しできる機会を嬉しく思います。私の政権は2050年までに温室効果ガスの排出を実質ゼロにするカーボンニュートラルの実現を目指すことを宣言しました。またそれに伴い、気候野心同盟への参加を決定しました。温暖化への対応は経済成長を妨げるものではなく、むしろ大きな成長につながります。日本は成長戦略の柱に経済と環境の好循環を掲げ、次世代型太陽電池、カーボンリサイクル、水素の活用など、革新的なイノベーションを通じて、グリーン社会の実現に努力していきます。2030年に向けた日本の取り組みについても、新たな目標を踏まえて議論を進め、COP26 までに国連に通報することを目指します。日本は世界の脱炭素移行を支援するため、国際協力にも引き続き取り組みます。本年官民合わせて約 1.3 兆円、約118億ドルの支援を行います。緑の気候基金に対しては、最大で総額30億ドルを拠出します。来年の COP26 に向けて、各国と協力しながら、パリ協定の目標である脱炭素社会の実現のため、指導力を発揮していく決意です。ご清聴ありがとうございました。
La Argentina reafirma su compromiso con el Acuerdo de París a la luz de la ciencia y adopta el cambio climático como política de Estado. Nuestro país paga un alto precio por el impacto del cambio climático en su territorio y en su estructura social y productiva, y hace un enorme esfuerzo en acciones de mitigación y adaptación cuyo monto asciende a un estimado de $15.000 millones con financiamiento internacional. Aunque ambicioso, esto es insuficiente. es imperioso un mayor compromiso y cooperación por parte de los países más desarrollados para ampliarlo. Con verdadera convicción anunciamos los compromisos que orientan la política y la acción climática argentina en los próximos años. En primer lugar, y en respuesta al llamado a aumentar la ambición climática, hemos decidido adelantar la presentación de la nueva contribución determinada nacional para este año. La Argentina presentará, con miras al 2030, una meta que limitará sus emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero a un nivel de casi 26% inferior a la contribución determinada nacional previamente comprometida. Adicionalmente, la nueva contribución incluirá la comunicación de adaptación, reforzando la importancia que reviste esta problemática para países como la Argentina. En segundo lugar, la Argentina se compromete a presentar una estrategia de desarrollo con bajas emisiones a largo plazo, con el objetivo de alcanzar un desarrollo neutral en carbono en el año 2050. En tercer lugar, en cumplimiento de la Ley Nacional de Presupuestos Mínimos de Adaptación y Mitigación del Cambio Climático Global, trabajamos a través de nuestro Gabinete de Cambio Climático en la elaboración de un Plan Nacional de Adaptación y Mitigación claro y ambicioso. Asumamos juntos el desafío de impulsar una transformación justa y ambiciosa y decididamente inclusiva como forma de reconstruirnos mejor, consciente de la responsabilidad individual y colectiva respecto al medio ambiente. Promovamos en este mismo espíritu de solidaridad un diálogo de alto nivel sobre acceso equitativo a medios de implementación, tales como recursos financieros, transferencias de tecnología y construcción de capacidades para la consecución de los compromisos climáticos. Como enseña el Papa Francisco, abramos nuestros ojos y nuestros corazones para actuar con una nueva sensibilidad. El planeta nos dice basta. Asumamos la responsabilidad histórica de convertirnos en artífices de un mundo mejor, reconstruido sobre los sólidos pilares de un desarrollo ambientalmente sostenible, innovador, solidario e inclusivo. Muchas gracias.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, warm greetings from His Majesty the King and the people of Bhutan. It is my pleasure to join you all today. As we continue to battle the pandemic, this is a timely dialogue, as well as a reminder that we are all interdependent. But unfortunately, both climate change and COVID-19 affects the poorer countries more. As a practicing doctor, I know the damages rising temperature can cause to our body and mind. We call it fever. May I say that our Mother Earth is having a fever, and the evidence says that Paris Agreement has the solution to it. For us, Bhutan's monarch have offered one of the most efficient and sustainable nationally determined contribution, which is our sacred constitution. Our constitution mandates maintaining 60% of our country under forest cover at all times to come. We also have to ensure intergenerational equity when it comes to natural resources. We are carbon negative today. What other countries are trying to achieve by 2050, we are already there. But this does not mean that we'll be complacent. Even though our main source of energy is hydropower, we have already started investing in solar and wind energies. After knowing that the primary emitters in our country is fossil fuel-driven cars, we have already started a project to replace these cars with the electric ones. Last year, at the UN Climate Action Summit, I had the opportunity to launch the LDC vision of Climate Resilient Development Pathway by 2030 and net zero emission by 2050. Earlier this week, as the chair of LDC Group, we hosted the Thimphu Ambition Summit. At least 19 LDCs are preparing to submit their new and updated NDCs by the end of this year. We are counting on the support from the international community to help implement these plans. Left up to us, because of lack of resources and technical expertise, we cannot do much, and this would remain a mere vision on paper. Therefore, today is an opportunity to rededicate ourselves to this cause. We seek concrete and more interventions from greater emitters. Only then we can make a difference. Let us heal the world together. I thank you and Tashidele.
5 years ago, the world's leaders gathered in Paris and chose to boldly confront the climate crisis for our health, for our future, and for our economy. In the years since, we've witnessed more extreme storms, unpredictable flooding, and stress on our Great Lakes. And this is just a taste of what's to come if we don't act now. As we continue to grapple with the pandemic ripping through our communities, we've seen firsthand what happens when U.S. officials fail to prepare. We cannot make the same mistake when it comes to the impending climate crisis. States like Michigan have shown what it means to take climate change seriously. When the U.S. federal government stepped back, we stepped up. We joined the U.S. Climate Alliance, a bipartisan coalition of 25 U.S. governors committed to the goals of Paris. And like so many other leading regions and nations around the world, we just set our own target to make our state carbon neutral by 2050. This has the potential to create millions of new jobs. Michiganders are already unlocking the benefits of clean growth by transforming and electrifying the U.S. auto industry, which is long called Michigan home. And we're not alone. More than 4,000 cities, states, businesses, healthcare organizations, faith groups, tribes, colleges and universities, and community groups have put forward a new statement to go further in partnership with the federal government. Make no mistake, America is all in. So today, let's recognize and reflect on how far we've come, but let's not lose sight of how far we still have to go. Let's get to it together. Thank you.
Hey, this is Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker. I'm pleased to be addressing you today at the 2020 Climate Ambition Summit. And I'm grateful for our conversations and partnership with our colleagues in the United Kingdom on the issues of climate change and clean energy. Climate change presents a significant threat to residents, natural resources, economy, and quality of life in Massachusetts and throughout the world. And we know the next decade will be pivotal in our ability to mitigate its worst impacts and adapt to an already changing climate. These are real impacts, they're happening now, and they require urgent and ambitious action. And that's why Massachusetts is a proud member of the U.S. Climate Alliance, working with a bipartisan coalition of governors, including my colleague, Governor Whitmer, to uphold and build upon the commitments made in the Paris Climate Accord. Earlier this year, I set an aggressive target for Massachusetts to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050. In the coming weeks, we'll release our roadmap to 2050, a study outlining policies and strategies to achieve this ambitious emissions target. We made substantial progress through 2 successive offshore wind energy procurements to date, totaling 1,600 megawatts, with each project setting a record low price point for the U.S. market. This is a significant milestone in offshore wind in the U.S., and other states are taking notice and advancing their own goals. And as we continue to develop the workforce and infrastructure we need to develop a strong offshore wind industry on the East Coast, we're grateful for the expertise, best practices, and shared knowledge from our friends in the UK, who have already brought their expertise and ingenuity to the U.S. market. And I want to thank you again for this opportunity to speak today.
Well, thank you there to Governor Baker, and he, along with Governor Whitmer, are both members of the U.S. Climate Alliance. And don't forget, you can also be part of our conversation. Use your social media channels on #ClimateAction. So such is the nature of this Climate Ambition Summit that we have so many world leaders who want to speak. So we now have another collection of speakers. We have Sanna Marin, Prime Minister of Finland, who's going to be followed by Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, and then Moon Jae-in, President of the Republic of Korea. and then Ali Bongo Ondimba, President of Gabon in West Africa. And then also we go to Belize, to the Prime Minister there, John Briceno, and Dr. Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany. And then we are also going to hear two voices from Sierra Leone. We have Yvonne Akisoy, who's the mayor of Freetown, the capital, and also Zakiatou Sese, who's chairperson of the Community Disaster Management Committee and also training facilitator there. And then we're also going to hear from Alison Martin, who's CEO of Zurich Insurance, and they today are launching what they're calling the Race for Resilience, because of course insurance companies have a very important role to play in that. So let's kick off with Sanna Marin, the Prime Minister of Finland.
Finland aims to be the world's first climate-neutral welfare society. We are committed to become climate neutral by 2035 and have negative net emissions soon after that. We commit to take an active role in the global green recovery and transition aligned with the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda. Finland has already communicated to the UNFCCC its long-term strategy in line with 2035 climate neutrality. And as a member of the European Union, Finland is part of the EU's ambitious joint nationally determined contribution. We commit to scale up our climate finance, aiming at balanced mitigation and adaptation. Last year, our contribution was record high. Finland commits to actively promote a systemic approach. Climate aspects need to be part of our economic and financial policies. We act as a co-chair of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. We firmly believe that all climate action should be based on the best available science. For this, we need climate science and forecasting services. The Finnish Meteorological Institute and the Finnish government commit to collaborate globally towards strong early warning systems. We commit to promote sustainable food systems and fight against biodiversity loss. Renewable energy, nature-based solutions, circular economy, innovation and digital transformation are all key areas in Finland's climate action. There is a clear risk that inequality between nations will increase as a cause of COVID pandemic. We urge all of us to implement recovery measures in line with the UN Secretary General's 6 principles. And finally, we commit to share our experiences to facilitate the global green transition. By committing ourselves into climate dialogue, we can build a common green future for our children and their children.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to join you today in the commemoration of the 5th anniversary of the historic Paris Agreement. Ethiopia has taken bold leadership on climate action by launching its ambitious climate-resilient green economy strategy that aspires to build a carbon-neutral and resilient economy by 2030. Over the last 2 years, this strategy has been fully mainstreamed into the recently launched 10-year Perspective Development Plan, which runs from 2021 to 2030. As part of our commitment to the Paris Agreement, we have also launched our 15 years ambitious National Adaptation Plan, aimed at reducing the vulnerability of the country to the adverse impacts of climate change. This plan has identified 18 options across the most vulnerable sectors, including agriculture, forestry, health, and transport. We have also recently intensified our commitment in the fight against climate change by launching our Green Legacy National Flagship Initiative in 2019, aimed at planting 20 billion seedlings within 4 years. During the last 2 years, we have managed to plant more than 9 billion seedlings. As of next year, my government is working to extend the Green Legacy Initiative into neighboring countries. Ethiopia is also on the verge of finalizing the process of updating its nationally determined contribution, as well as the preparation of the 2050 long-term low-carbon development strategy, despite the challenges posed by the COVID-19. I would like to reiterate the unwavering commitment of Ethiopia in the global fight against climate change and call upon all parties to enhance their ambition and scale up their climate finance support for developing countries. I thank you.
존경하는 유엔 사무총장님, 각국 정상 여러분, 파리 협정 체결 5주년이자 이행 첫 해를 맞아 기후 목표 정상회의에 함께하게 되어 매우 기쁩니다. 코로나의 도전이 거센 가운데서도 기후 목표 정상회의 개최를 위해 노력해 주신 구테레시 사무총장님과 영국, 프랑스, 칠레, 이탈리아 정상들에게 경의를 표합니다. 한국은 2050년 탄소 중립 사회로 가기 위해 탄소 중립과 경제 성장, 삶의 질 향상을 동시에 달성하는 포용적 비전을 마련했습니다. 정부, 의회와 지자체에서 다양한 논의를 진행해왔고 탄소 중립선언 비전 선포식을 통해 온 국민이 함께 탄소 중립을 실천하기로 다짐했습니다. 한국은 국민이 일상 속에서 자발적으로 실천할 수 있는 시나리오를 마련하고 사회 각 부문별로 체계적인 로드맵을 만들어 실행할 계획입니다. 또한 디지털 혁신과 결합한 그린 뉴딜을 통해 녹색 산업을 발전시킬 것입니다. 기후위기를 포용적이며 지속 가능한 성장의 기회로 삼아 새로운 일자리를 만들고 그린 뉴딜의 경험과 성과를 모든 나라와 공유하겠습니다. 국제사회의 공동 대응 노력에도 함께할 것입니다. 2050년 탄소 중립 목표 달성을 위한 장기 저탄소 발전 전략을 올해 안에 마련하고 2030년 국가 결정 기여를 절대량 목표 방식으로 전환하여 유엔에 제출할 예정입니다. 아울러 2030년 감축 목표도 조속히 상향 제출할 수 있도록 노력할 것입니다. 내년 5월 서울에서 제2차 P4G 정상회의가 열립니다. 기후위기 극복을 위해 국제사회가 더욱 긴밀히 협력할 수 있도록 개최국으로서 최선을 다하겠습니다. 제2차 P4G 정상회의에 깊은 관심과 참여를 당부드립니다. 감사합니다.
Ladies and gentlemen, 5 years after Paris, it is time for increased ambition. As chair of the African Group of Negotiators, I call for immediate action to combat climate change. As champion of the African Adaptation Initiative, it gives me hope that we can come together in the face of climate change, a threat far more significant than COVID-19. Adaptation is a key priority for our continent. To this end, I am pleased to announce the strategic partnership between the African Adaptation Initiative and Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's Global Center for Adaptation to accelerate adaptation ambition and action in Africa. I'm also delighted to announce that a few days ago, the Green Climate Fund endorsed its largest readiness program that brings together 25 African countries under the auspices of the AAI. Africa emits just 4% of global emissions. Yet, we all published our NDCs in 2015, and we are strongly committed to revising them before Glasgow. We also continue to advance our 3 regional initiatives in the Sahel, the African island states, and the Congo Basin. Mesdames et messieurs, les forêts du bassin du Congo séquestrent des quantités importantes de carbone et fournissent à l'humanité des services écosystémiques irremplaçables. Les solutions basées sur la nature sont notre plus grand allié nous permettant à la fois de nous adapter et d'atténuer les changements climatiques. Couvert à 88% par des forêts tropicales humides, le Gabon absorbe 3 fois plus de CO2 qu'il en émet. Grâce à nos politiques de gestion durable de la forêt, nos absorptions nettes de CO2 ont déjà augmenté de près de 20%. Une loi sur le climat est en préparation. Cet engagement, encore plus ambitieux, sera décliné avant la conférence de Glasgow, à travers notre contribution déterminée au niveau national. Le Gabon s'engagera à préserver ses forêts tropicales et à augmenter son absorption nette de CO2. Je vous remercie.
Belize is pleased to join the trailblazing small island developing states who pledged and delivered ambitious climate plans, demonstrating once again SID's leadership and our commitment to doing more than our fair share to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. In this spirit, Belize's enhanced nationally determined contribution will endeavor to trigger tripping points that will catalyze systemic domestic transformation in high carbon intensity sectors. In the forestry sector, Belize will finalize our REDD plus strategy that will establish an environmentally credible and measurable approach to slow, halt, and reverse forest loss and degradation, and facilitating the absorption of an additional 16 million tons of carbon. In the energy sector, we will move steadily towards expanding renewable energy uptake to 85% by 2030. We plan to double mangrove protection by increasing the areas under protection from 12,826 hectares to 24,826 hectares. Climate change is already one of the most serious threats to Belize. We constantly face destruction from natural hazards and instances of drought, coastal erosion, flooding, and variable precipitation patterns. Combined, these impacts severely imperil our environmental, physical, social, and economic systems and our sustainable development as a whole. We have no choice but to act with urgency and with foresight so as to ensure the dignity of every Belizean and the preservation of our national heritage for future generations. A groundswell of action and support, particularly from those with historical responsibility, is critical to avert or minimize loss and damage. Today, as we commemorate the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, let us all recall our collective commitment and choose to act, because the time to address the climate crisis was yesterday. Thank you.
Mit dem Klimaschutzabkommen von Paris ist die Weltgemeinschaft verbindliche Verpflichtungen eingegangen. Deutschland weiß um seine Verantwortung und darum, dass ehrgeizige Ziele auch ehrgeizige nationale Beiträge erfordern. Dazu steigen wir neben der Kernkraft auch aus der Kohleverstromung aus und bauen erneuerbare Energien weiter aus. Wir setzen auf CO2-Bepreisung und starten deshalb 2021 auch den nationalen Emissionshandel für Verkehr und Wärme. Alle Staaten müssen notwendige Klimaschutzinvestitionen finanzieren können. Weltweit sollte also günstiges Kapital zur Verfügung stehen. Deutschland will hierfür zusätzlich knapp 500 Millionen Euro bereitstellen. Ich setze mich dafür ein, dass wir international einen Prozess zur Klimafinanzierung post-2020 starten und bis zur COP26 abschließen. Deutschland hält seine Zusage ein, seine Haushaltsmittel zur Klimafinanzierung bis 2020 auf jährlich 4 Milliarden Euro zu verdoppeln. Und auch in Zukunft wird Deutschland einen angemessenen Beitrag leisten. Zudem haben wir mit der Weltbank und weiteren Partnern die Green Recovery Initiative gestartet. Damit wollen wir 160 Milliarden US-Dollar der Weltbank Wirtschaftshilfen auf Nachhaltigkeit und Klimaschutz ausrichten. Außerdem unterstützt Deutschland mit der NAMA Facility Entwicklungsländer mit ambitionierten Klimazusagen. Sich als Weltgemeinschaft ehrgeizige Ziele zu setzen, ist das eine. Sie zu erreichen, das andere. Das eine wie das andere wollen wir schaffen. Das ist das Zeichen, das ich mir von der COP26 wünsche.
The impact of climate change is already being acutely felt in the city of Freetown. Abnormally heavy rainfall leads to flooding, but also leads to crop failure, which in turn has increased the rate of rural-urban migration. Some of the most vulnerable people looking to improve their lives find themselves now within the city, facing the floods, but also being along our coastline in slum communities. In order for us to address this, Freetown, the Tree Town, is our campaign to plant 1 million trees within the rainy seasons of 2020 and 2021. We are almost there, and this is an example of what can be done. I'm excited by the Champions Race for Resilience, and along with them, I commit to continue to be an agent of change, to mobilize resilient action in cities such as mine. I'd like to thank the UN, the UK, France, Italy, and Chile, and the partners for the honor of allowing us to share our story of Freetown's resilience. And we look forward to collectively working together to make sure resilience in cities is a feature of our post-COVID recovery. Thank you.
My name is Zakia Tse, and I live in Bazak, an informal settlement in Freetown, Sierra Leone. I'm a chairperson and team facilitators of the Community Disaster Management Committee, CDMC, through which these structures that spread across Freetown, we clean the drainages and waterways to prevent seasonal flooding in various settlements, and have collaborated with Freetown City Council to plant 1 million trees in Freetown, through which my communities and neighborhood can be more resilient. I am here to launch the Races for Resilience campaign, through which the high-level champion aim catalyze action from non-state actors to help make 4 billion people from vulnerable groups and communities like me more climate resilient by 2030.
Hello, I'm Alison Martin. I'm the CEO for EMEA and Bank Distribution at Zurich Insurance Group, and also Executive Sponsor for Sustainability. As a proud member of the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance, working with our partners, we're actively supporting communities to become more resilient to climate change. Our vision is to stop flooding from so negatively impacting people's lives and livelihoods. Flood is the most devastating of natural hazards and is only being exacerbated by climate change. Last year, we committed to helping 2 million people to improve their resilience to flood by 2023 through things like our flood resilience measurement framework and toolkits. And starting from next year, we will triple funding by 2025, we'll expand our reach from 11 to 21 countries, and we'll aim to work in an additional 200 communities. The Alliance fully supports the Race for Resilience campaign, the opportunity to share learnings and to help shield the most vulnerable communities from natural catastrophes. Now is the time to accelerate climate change adaptation. And on the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, we urge the global community to join the race for resilience, to deliver on climate commitments, to achieve meaningful outcomes that help people cope with climate change, and importantly, to improve the lives of those who are on the front line of climate chaos. Thank you.
So that's Alison Martin, the CEO of Zurich Insurance, ending that collection of contributors, and the last three people talking, of course, about the importance of resilience and the race to resilience. So now we have 4 heads of government I want to introduce to you. We have José Vorek Bainimarama, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Fiji. He's followed by Andrew Holness, Prime Minister of Jamaica, Francisco Sagasti Hochhausler, President of the Republic of Peru, and Mette Frederiksen, Prime Minister of Denmark. So let us hear from these leaders.
Bulaminaka. Here in Fiji, we are among the first on earth to see the new sun rise each day. Some say it gives us a glimpse into the future. I don't know about that. But I do know Fijians are already seeing life on the front lines of the rising seas, stronger storms, and other devastating impacts of the climate crisis. Driven by existential urgency, Fiji was the first nation in the world to ratify the Paris Agreement. Even mired in our worst ever economic recession due to COVID-19, Fiji remains committed to a reduction of 30% in energy emissions by 2030 and carbon neutrality by mid-century. Building on our nationally determined contribution, our NDCs, from 2015, we are specifically committing to reduce emissions in the waste sector to near zero through methane capture and waste-to-energy solutions, and in transport through a conversion towards electric vehicles and renewable energy. We also aim to plant 30 million trees by 2035, and we have partnered with our fellow Pacific nations to decarbonize regional shipping. We will soon pass a groundbreaking climate change bill to cement our net zero commitment across every aspect of governance, and we will mainstream adaptation and oceans action as part of our more ambitious NDC.
Excellencies, if ever there was a time to bring climate action to the forefront, the time is now. These uncertain times test our resilience and the will to act decisively. However, our willingness to adapt, to change, innovate our way out of crisis, and be bold in our ambition will be the measure of our success. For Jamaica, ambition means action that speaks louder than mere words of commitment. We strive for actionable ambition. Jamaica submitted an ambitious and enhanced nationally determined contribution with new targets to increase the use of renewable energy, advance energy efficiency, and protect our forests and natural assets. We are updating our climate change policy framework. We are completing a national adaptation plan and will complete our long-term low carbon and climate resilient strategy in 2021. This is our clear pathway to net zero emissions by 2050, which will give rise to unprecedented legislation for social and economic changes for decades ahead. As we sprint to Glasgow, I leave you with profound words of the fastest sprinter alive, our very own Usain Bolt, who asserted that the difference between the impossible and the possible lies in determination. Let us therefore be determined to make COP26 the turning point to what we know is possible. We have the technology, we have the capacity. We now need the will and the enabling finance.
Secretario General de las Naciones Unidas, Antonio Guterres. Presidente de la COP26 del Reino Unido, Alok Sharma. Distinguidas ministras y ministros, damas y caballeros. La pandemia de la COVID-19 y sus efectos adversos han acaparado nuestra atención en los últimos tiempos. No hay duda que se trata de la amenaza más apremiante que enfrenta el mundo. Pero no nos equivoquemos, la crisis climática continúa siendo el mayor riesgo al desarrollo que el ser humano enfrenta hoy en día. Tenemos una catástrofe acelerada, COVID-19, y una catástrofe en cámara no tan lenta, el cambio climático. Por ello, en esta cumbre de celebración del 5º aniversario de la suscripción del Acuerdo de París, el Perú desea reafirmar su compromiso en el objetivo común de enfrentar el cambio climático, reconociendo que sin ciencia y tecnología no hay futuro, no hay manera de enfrentar el cambio climático. En ese contexto, el Perú se suma al llamado a la ambición climática, presentando los siguientes compromisos. En términos de mitigación, aumentaremos nuestra ambición de un 30 a un 40% de reducción de emisiones para el año 2030. Este compromiso se reflejará en la actualización de nuestras contribuciones nacionalmente determinadas. En términos de adaptación, concluiremos la formulación del Plan Nacional de Adaptación. Por último, culminaremos la actualización de la Estrategia Nacional ante el Cambio Climático al 2050, que definirá la transición progresiva del Perú hacia la carbono neutralidad, pero con un fuerte enfoque de justicia ambiental. Debido a nuestra condición de país mega diverso, a lo largo de la historia el clima nos ha planteado grandes desafíos que nos han obligado a desplegar nuestras mejores capacidades y creatividad. Nuestro compromiso, a pocos meses de celebrar 200 años de vida republicana, es reencontrar ese espíritu ancestral y sentar las bases para una acción climática que nos permita avanzar hacia el desarrollo sostenible y lograr el bienestar de todos los peruanos y peruanas.
As Prime Minister, I have to ask an important question. What do we leave for future generations? 5 years ago in Paris, we promised to leave the climate in much better shape. Unfortunately, we are not on the right track if we are to keep that promise. In Denmark, we have now adopted our first climate law with a legally binding target to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 70% by 2030. Our targets are ambitious, and therefore our work to deliver is urgent. We have just recently put plans in place to build the world's first giant offshore energy island, which would more than triple our offshore wind capacity. And we have more than doubled the funding for green research since 2019. Within 1 year, we have made plans that come 25% of the way to reach our goal for 2030. But we need the European Union and the rest of the world to follow. This is why we have just adopted our first ever long-term global climate action strategy. We aim to increase our green development assistance budget with around 60% from 2019 to 2021. With decades of experiences in developing a sustainable energy system, we are very keen to share this knowledge with others. We made a promise in Paris. The children of the world trust that we will keep it. And therefore, all of us, we need to act now.
So the Prime Minister of Denmark there, Mette Frederiksen, and in fact since she recorded that message, I can tell you that the Danish Parliament has voted to end all oil and gas extraction in the North Sea in 2050. They're going to cancel all future licensing rounds, and they're going to also make sure that they have a just transition for all those workers who will lose their jobs from the fossil fuel sector. And as the European Union's largest oil producer, Denmark says it's now going to use this decision to really push for further global action on fossil fuels. Don't forget you can join today's conversation, #ClimateAction. And also if you go to the website climateambitionsummit2020.org, you can also see what businesses are doing taking action on climate change. All right, we now have some more remarks for you from world leaders. We have KP Sharma Oli, the Prime Minister of Nepal, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel. And then we're going to play you another short film, a case study, which looks very much at the growth and future potential of renewable energy sources something that's very important, of course, in this debate. And then we'll hear from Tim Cook, who's CEO of Apple, and that's one of the biggest companies in the world that's aligning itself and its supply chain with a very ambitious carbon neutrality target. So first, let us go to Nepal.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I commend the leadership of Chile, France, Italy, UK, and the United Nations for convening this summit. The COVID-19 has forced us to postpone the COP26. However, our quest for a cleaner and greener earth cannot be postponed. Nepal strongly supports the Paris Agreement and the call to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. We are committed to the promotion of climate resilient development and aim to move towards a zero carbon economy. To promote green growth and green recovery, we prioritize producing clean and renewable energy, promoting e-mobility, low carbon infrastructure, and ecotourism. We aim to extend protected area from 23% to 30% by 2030 and preserve biodiversity. I urge the world to recognize the value of the Himalayas to maintain ecological balance in the oceans and control global warming. Nepal will submit enhanced indices by the end of this year and develop an ambitious long-term strategy to reach net zero scenario by 2050. We are developing a national adaptation plan and corresponding climate finance strategy and roadmap by 2021. We will introduce climate resilient adaptation plans in all 753 local levels by 2030. Easy and adequate access to climate finance becomes critical for us to implement these ambitions. We shake hands of all countries to march ahead for a greener journey together. Thank you.
I thank Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his team for hosting this important summit. Like the UK, Israel is totally committed to a successful transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy by 2050. We've already made crucial progress in two specific areas. In coal, we've substantially reduced our dependency. In fact, Israel is a global leader in cutting coal consumption. By 2025, that's just 5 years from now, barring an emergency, Israel will no longer be burning coal, any coal. In solar energy, over the last 5 years, we've increased our generation from 2% to 10%. By 2030, solar energy will provide over a third of all Israel's electricity. The challenge we still face in solar energy is storage. My government is pursuing policies that will overcome this challenge. We're fortunate to have hundreds of Israeli startups that are working on this and related issues in alternative energy. These companies have and will receive billions of dollars in investments. I'm convinced that Israeli scientists and Israeli entrepreneurs, with their unquenchable ingenuity, will enable us to play our part in the global solar revolution. Cooperation in the field of solar energy is also an integral part of our new cooperation with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. So not only is solar energy helping eliminate dependency on fossil fuels, it's helping us cement Arab-Israeli peace. And both these goals offer us a bright, clean, and safe future. Thank you.
Le complexe Nourouar-Zazat jouit d'un ensoleillement exceptionnel, 2635 kWh par mètre carré par an, parmi les plus élevés au monde. Le site est composé de 4 centrales solaires d'une puissance totale de 580 MW.
throughout history, it's probably one of the fastest transitions we're seeing. We're in the midst of a new industrial revolution before our very eyes. Wind in the UK is now cheaper than fossil fuels, and we've seen the cost of offshore wind in particular plummet rapidly over the last few years.
Thank you to all of the advocates and leaders joining us today. This is an important gathering, and we at Apple don't take our presence in this group lightly. We wear it as a badge of duty. At this moment of historic urgency, every leader of nations, of companies, and of communities has a particular burden to act. This year, Apple has accelerated our progress. We became carbon neutral for our worldwide corporate emissions. Already, we're helping 95 of our suppliers transition to 100% renewable energy, a number we continue to grow. And we've unveiled a plan, unrivaled in its ambition, to achieve carbon neutrality for our entire supply chain and product usage by 2030, 20 years before the goal set by the United Nations. We see every part of our device life cycle, from design to manufacturing to durability and repair to recycling, as an opportunity for environmental innovation, moving us toward our goal of a closed-loop supply chain. The choice between the bottom line and the future of our planet is a false one, and each new green innovation offers the proof. This is no time for changes at the margins. Together, we can transition to a carbon-neutral economy and usher in a new era of inclusive opportunity. This is a moment for ambition, cooperation, and leadership. We at Apple are proud to be your partners, and we call on companies and governments around the world to do all we can to make 2021 the year we turn the corner for good. Thank you.
So Tim Cook, there, CEO of Apple, giving us an idea of what the business community is doing. Right, so now I also want to introduce to you another round of speakers, starting with the Honourable Bob Laumann-Weber, Prime Minister of Vanuatu, and of course the small island states, a very, very important voice to hear in all this. And he's followed by Lee Hsien Loong, Prime Minister of Singapore, then Stefan Löfven, Prime Minister of Sweden, and then we go to Africa, Rwanda, Paul Kagame, the president there, and then Lionel Angime, President of the Republic of Nauru. And then we're going to hear from some cities, because of course cities are very, very important. You know, about 70% of the world's population by about 2050 are going to be urban dwellers. So we've got Eric Garcetti, Mayor of Los Angeles in the United States, who's also chair of C40 Cities, which is an alliance of cities all over the world. And we also go to the Philippines to hear from Josefina Belmonte, who's Mayor of Quezon City. And we're going to get an announcement there about a number of new cities who are going to be joining the Race to Zero campaign. So let us go now to Vanuatu.
Thank you to all of the advocates and leaders joining us today. This is an important gathering, and we at Apple don't take our presence in this.
The Republic of Vanuatu's long-term vision on climate change and aspirations are embedded within the fundamental duties defined under its constitution to protect the Republic of Vanuatu and to save the national wealth, resources, environment, and in the interest of the present generation and the future generations. As you know, this may be difficult, by the impacts of COVID-19 and our existing vulnerability to natural disasters. The recent Category 5 cyclone Tropical Harold that struck Vanuatu during the COVID-19 border closure this year clearly demonstrates this. The threat of climate change makes it difficult to attain our sustainable development goals. Our extreme vulnerability means that our resilience on the multilateral system will continue to heighten. Vanuatu's current NDC mitigation targets in transitioning close to 100% renewable energy in electricity sector by 2030. Achieving this target would replace nearly all fossil fuel requirements for electricity generation in the country. Implementing the current NDC incurs several challenges, and the major challenges being the financial support to implement the key interventions. Our revised and updated NDC captures the potential GHG emission sectors, including land transport, waste, forestry, and agriculture. The updated NDC is also capturing adaptation, quantifiable targets, specifically for the two priority sectors of agriculture and water, which is also highlighted as a priority for Vanuatu's National Adaptation Plan of Action. Vanuatu is planning to submit its final NDC to the UNFCCC Secretariat by the end of December 2020. However, Vanuatu is calling on all countries to increase their climate ambitions to meet the goals of Paris Agreement on climate change. So climate financing needs to increase to ensure the recapitalization of financial instruments such as the Green Climate Fund. The processes of these funds should be simplified and made easier. At this juncture, I would like to call on the United Nations, the government of UK, alongside the government of Chile and the government of Italy, to support SEEDS to help them access potential funding to address the impact of climate change in their respective jurisdictions. For SEEDS like Vanuatu, climate change remains the biggest challenge, and addressing this head will be paramount for our future. I thank you all.
Excellencies, climate change is an existential threat for all of us, but especially for a small island state like Singapore. This global challenge requires a global response. Singapore will do our part together with other countries. We will meet our commitments under the Paris Agreement. We have submitted an enhanced nationally determined contribution. And despite our alternative energy constraints, we are taking bold steps to achieve our long-term low emissions development strategy. This includes quadrupling solar energy production by 2025, phasing out internal combustion engine vehicles by 2040, actively investing in low-carbon solutions, and promoting green financing, for instance, through a $2 billion green investments program. These will help Singapore transition to a low-carbon economy. But ultimately, Singapore will not be able to stop climate change on our own. All countries, big and small, must join hands and do our shares, not only to fulfill what we have agreed to under the Paris Agreement, but to continue to push the envelope on climate ambition so that we minimize the risk of a climate catastrophe destroying our children's world. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Paris Agreement was a triumph for multilateral cooperation. It gave us hope that we could curb climate change and rising temperatures. During these 5 years, we have seen progress. But science never lies, because current measures under the Paris Agreement are not enough. So the clock is ticking. We need to step up the pace. Sweden will do its part, internationally providing finance and innovative technology, and nationally by increasing measures to become the world's first fossil-free welfare state. Last week, we presented our national long-term strategy. By 2045, Sweden is to have 0 net emissions of greenhouse gases and thereafter achieve negative emissions. This autumn, our first global pilot plant for fossil-free steel production was launched, Hybrid. This is one of the biggest technological shifts in steel manufacturing in 1,000 years. In addition, a Swedish mining company, LKAB, will invest a further 40 billion euros to lower its emission, which could help their customers worldwide reduce their emissions by 35 million tons per year. It's equivalent to 2/3 of Swedish national emissions. The government's budget bill for 2021 includes up to 1.5 billion euros in green credit guarantees. On export finance, in addition to the existing ban on financing exports to coal power plants, by the end of 2020, no more export credit guarantees will be given for deals linked to the exploration, extraction, and transportation of coal. By 2022, we will end Swedish export credits for investments for fossil fuel prospecting and extraction. Last week, we hosted the second summit of the Leadership Group for Industry Transition, which we launched together with India last year. And I'm happy to announce that Sweden will provide a multi-annual contribution over 3 years to the Climate Investment Fund amounting to 30 million euros. We are the first country to provide multi-annual financial contributions to both the Adaptation Fund and the Least Developed Countries Fund, amounting to 100 million euro for the period 2019 to 2022. We need to step up our ambition and action. It is a responsibility for all countries. Let's walk the talk.
Excellencies, heads of state and government, UN Secretary General, I'm pleased to address today's Climate Ambition Summit. I thank the leaders of Chile, France, Italy, and the United Kingdom for convening this event. In May 2020, Rwanda submitted a revised and more ambitious nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement. This plan reflects Rwanda's vision to become a developed, low-carbon economy by 2050. We also intend to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 38% by 2030 compared to the business-as-usual scenario. This will be achieved by increasing efficiency in energy production, industrial processes, waste management, transportation, and agriculture. These efforts will mitigate an estimated 4.6 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. We are also strengthening the resilience of our economy and ecosystems through green urbanization and nature conservation. Nature-based solutions offer the best return on investment in terms of drawing down carbon and protecting biodiversity. Recent advances in renewable energy, including battery technology and clean cooling, provide assurance that it is possible to build net zero economies. Rwanda intends to take full advantage of these technologies. Ambitious action on climate change will make our world more resilient and healthy and also more prosperous. We should not miss out on the opportunity. I thank you.
Today we mark the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. After 5 years, it is evident that our current climate action is still far from adequate, and our trajectory is off the 1.5-degree goal. The COVID pandemic should not hinder our efforts to raise our ambition to meet the Paris Agreement goals. For Nauru, addressing climate change is ensuring our very existence. I am pleased to announce that Nauru's updated and enhanced NDC is being finalized to be submitted to UNFCCC this month. The updated NDC is a significant enhancement from our initial NDC in 2015, enumerating specific targets and actions for which Nauru plans to implement to achieve our climate and sustainable development objectives that will deliver significant benefits. The enhanced NDC sets the beginning of the path for Nauru to progress towards our aspiration of achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Nauru has made significant strides in achieving our goal of 50% renewable energy by 2030 and further commit to 100% renewable energy by 2050. Achieving this aspirational goal will be contingent on the mobilization of sufficient international financial, technical, and capacity building support. This ambitious mitigation effort must be pursued in tandem with urgent adaptation actions. Our NDC set out 6 goals that addresses multiple sectors and at the same time contribute to the overall national sustainable development goals aligned with the 2030 agenda. These were 1, productive land and coast, 2, health and productive people, 3, water security, 4, food security, 5, energy security, and 6, healthy environment. The new goals are good governance and loss and damage. Nauru is committed to work with partners in further promoting and advocating progress towards the United Nations response to the security implications of climate change.
Hello, I'm Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles and chair of C40 Cities. I'm so honored to join you in marking the 5th anniversary of the Paris Climate Agreement. And I'm so grateful to Prime Minister Johnson and to President Macron, to Secretary General Guterres, COP26 President Alex Sharma, the governments of Italy and Chile, and all who made this important convening possible. This meeting is absolutely essential because even in the face of our common fight to save lives and to defeat COVID-19, our shared effort to save the planet and to defeat the climate crisis can never and will never end. The Paris Agreement is a covenant among nations, but its consequences play out in our cities. So we, as mayors, have stepped up to lead. From LA to London, from Durban to Dakar, C40 cities have established their own roadmaps to achieve the Paris goals. Many more are on track to cutting their global emissions in half by 2030, including cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, and Chennai. And starting in 2021, all C40 cities will be required to adopt a climate action plan. Now we're taking one more critical step, kicking off a new campaign called Cities Race to Zero, where we will recruit as many as 1,000 cities, large and small, to take bold action to bring the Paris Agreement to life and embrace the principles of the global Green New Deal. And today, I'm proud to announce that since we launched Cities Race to Zero last month, 70 new cities have already joined that effort. No matter what, mayors will continue to lead the way to a cleaner and fairer world. One of my friends and one of my fellow mayors is C40 leader Joy Belmonte in Quezon City in the Philippines. And it's my pleasure to turn things over to her.
Greetings, I am Joy Belmonte, Mayor of Quezon City in the Philippines. Thank you, Mayor Garcetti, for those inspiring words and the leadership you provide as chair of the C40 cities. The lessons from this most challenging year are clear: delivering a green and just recovery to the COVID-19 crisis, creating strong, fair economies that serve everyone, and cutting greenhouse gas emissions quickly enough to tackle the climate crisis. Success in all of these ambitions is the only way we can secure the future we want in the world's greatest cities. And mayors are taking action to protect the lives and livelihoods of men and women in our communities. We are reclaiming city streets from cars to allow people to safely move about on foot or bikes. We are investing in urban agriculture programs to reduce the distance our food travels. And we are expanding parks, gardens, and green spaces. In Quezon City, with the support of the C40 Cities Finance Facility, we are running a pioneering program to install solar panels in 50 public schools, reducing their vulnerability to typhoons and our collective reliance on fossil fuels. This year, we expanded the program to include health facilities whose smooth functioning has been essential during the pandemic. We look forward to working with the leaders across business, industry, civil society, and nation-states to ensure COP26 delivers on the ambition already laid out by cities across the world. Thank you very much, and God bless us all.
So just a couple of examples there of how cities and states all over the world are really making a contribution on climate change. And it's clear that the Paris Agreement is very much clearly at the core of those contributions that we've heard from there. So we have now another round of voices for you from all over the world, and we have Dr. Lazarus McCarthy Chakwera, President of Malawi in Africa. He's followed by Pedro Sanchez Perez Castellon, President of Spain, President of the Government of Spain, I should say. Then we go to Kiribati, to the President there, Taneti Amamu, and then to Niger in Africa, Mahamadou Issoufou, the President. And then to Grenada, the Prime Minister there, the Right Honourable Dr. Keith Mitchell, and Thongloun Sisoulith, the Prime Minister of the Lao PDR. And then we have a couple of voices from the world of industry. We have Jamshed N. Godrej, Chairman and Managing Director of Godrej & Boyce. That's an Indian manufacturing company which employs more than 14,000 people, so pretty large. And then we also hear from Mahendra Singhi, who is CEO of Dalmia Cement. And we're going to hear from Mahendra Singhi about their own roadmap to become carbon negative, what's called the Global Cement and Concrete Association's Climate Ambition for 2050. So you can see lots of sectors getting involved. So let us go to Africa now, to Malawi, for our first contribution in this round. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, it's an honor for me to address you on this auspicious occasion of commemorating the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. We are focusing on revising the nationally determined contributions, NDCs, to raise ambition on carbon emission reduction and climate resilience building in key economic sectors. These will include new and ambitious adaptation targets in the tourism sector, biological diversity, social protection, disaster risk reduction, and early warning systems. Secondly, restoring 4.5 million hectares of degraded forest landscapes by 2030. Thirdly, introducing a carbon levy on fuel in the national budget as a preliminary measure to mitigate the effects of climate change. This has required tremendous political commitment on the part of my administration, considering our economic constraints and the $3.8 million cost of climate change management. We do so because we see the environmental and economic rewards as greater than the costs. And fourthly, replacing diesel-powered generators with solar power plants for the national grid. Though we have been using emergency diesel generators to supplement the 98% hydropower generation, we will phase these out within a year. And fifthly, reviewing the evidence on effective adaptation and resilience interventions that add value to the existing climate adaptation policy and planning processes in line with Malawi's position as a signatory of the Least Developed Countries Initiative for Effective Adaptation and Resilience Program, LIFE-AR. In conclusion, I affirm my government's aspiration to attain climate resilience, improved adaptive capacity, improved food security and nutrition, restored ecosystems and landscapes. In short, we are moving towards carbon neutrality by the year 2050. And I thank you for your attention.
La emergencia climática es el mayor desafío de nuestra civilización. Debemos entender, por tanto, que la acción climática no es solo una inversión potencial para nuestras economías, que lo es, sino una obligación para la seguridad de nuestros ciudadanos y de nuestras ciudadanas. Y también una garantía de futuro para las próximas generaciones. Durante el año 2020, el Gobierno de España ha dado pasos sólidos, determinados, inequívocos, para sentar las bases del cambio y acelerar la transición ecológica. En enero emitimos una declaración de emergencia climática aprobada en el Consejo de Ministros. En mayo presentamos un proyecto de ley de cambio climático y transición energética. En septiembre adoptamos el Plan Nacional de Adaptación al Cambio Climático y hoy tengo también la satisfacción de anunciar un nuevo impulso a todo este compromiso del Gobierno de España y de la sociedad española en la adaptación y en la lucha contra el cambio climático. Acabamos de aprobar la estrategia de descarbonización a largo plazo para alcanzar la neutralidad climática en el año 2050. Toda esta estrategia que estamos desarrollando sin pausa se basa en dos pilares fundamentales. El primero de ellos es que vamos a cambiar las fuentes de energía que consumimos. El 97% tiene que ser renovable, será renovable, y vamos a consumir menos de un 50% gracias a la eficiencia y al ahorro energético. Es algo más, en consecuencia, que una estrategia política. Es una apuesta colectiva por un mundo diferente, en el que nuestras casas, nuestros edificios públicos, nuestros coches, el medio en el que nos movemos de transporte, las oficinas, las fábricas, estarán adaptados y diseñados para contribuir al objetivo último de la neutralidad climática. Al objetivo último, en definitiva, de salvar a nuestro planeta. En 2030, la previsión es que 5 millones de vehículos eléctricos circularán por nuestras carreteras y en 2050 prácticamente todos los sistemas de climatización serán renovables y el hidrógeno verde supondrá el 25% del consumo energético industrial. Estas son las previsiones que maneja el Gobierno de España. Por esto trabajamos. Estas transformaciones exigen, lógicamente, decisiones complejas, difíciles, especialmente para los sectores en transición, como son las centrales térmicas, las centrales nucleares o la minería del carbón. Por eso, hemos aprobado también la estrategia de transición justa para asegurarnos que nadie quede atrás, para que estas transiciones no excluyan, sino que integren a la mayor parte de la población, sobre todo en aquellos territorios en los que restan oportunidades como consecuencia de esta transición energética. Confío, en definitiva, en que esta cumbre de ambición climática nos ayude a mantener el impulso para que juntos logremos un progreso real el año que viene en Glasgow, para que juntas, construyamos el mundo que se merecen nuestros hijos, nuestras hijas, nuestros nietos, nuestras nietas. Gracias.
Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, in His holy and gracious name, as part of its ambitious commitments, Kiribati has developed an enhanced nationally determined contribution law known as NDC to be formally launched and submitted to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in January 2021. In that light, Kiribati has incorporated new sectors such as agroforestry, maritime, aviation, and more prominent transport sector-related actions. We have also incorporated additional gases into the mix of our NDC to scale up our efforts on mitigation as well as adaptation. One of our big achievements nationally is that Kiribati, for the first time, has passed its Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management Act in 2019. This act will serve as our foundation for all actions to be implemented across sectors and at the local community level as well. In addition, the Kiribati Joint Implementation Plan for Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management, known as KJIP, has been revised to emphasize the need for adaptation, mitigation, and resilient development to form part of the 3 pillars of implementation strategies aimed at addressing our vulnerabilities that exist and will continue to be noticed by people now and in times to come. Furthermore, the climate change and disaster risk finance assessments have also been concluded in country. paving with it recommendations and the reform and enhancements which need to be done at the national level to ensure that climate finance access is undertaken through informed processes and with enhanced capacities. Kiriba's ambition is both balanced and practical. We commit to ensuring that we are doing our part with regard to emission reduction. We have also taken ambitious steps towards our collective efforts to coordinate and strategically implement our adaptation measures in Kiribati. Our climate change priorities are water and sanitation, coastal protection and renewable energy, and we continue to take bold steps in accessing climate finance to ensure we are taking actions accordingly. While Kiribati is a least developed country and small island developing state, we want to reassure parties that we are doing our part practically and strategically. And with this, we also call on our brothers and sisters within our global community to continue to do their part in ambitiously tackling climate change and disasters through emissions reduction and the implementation of the NDCs. As a global community, we need to ensure a forward-looking approach to the actions we take and where the target is for a prosperous and resilient future. I thank you. And let me conclude by bestowing our traditional blessings of the Maori, the Roi and the Tabumua, meaning good health, peace, and prosperity. While the spirit and the bells for Christmas are ringing, let me also wish you all a Merry Christmas and a prosperous New Year. Kamdap. Thank you very much.
Mesdames et Messieurs, je voudrais féliciter les organisateurs et les participants à l'événement qui nous réunit aujourd'hui et en ma qualité de président de la commission climat pour la région du Sahel, réaffirmer tout l'intérêt que le Niger et la région du Sahel attachent aux réflexions sur un sujet aussi important que celui de l'ambition climatique. Le présent sommet, qui marque le 5e anniversaire de l'accord de Paris, est par conséquent l'occasion pour le Niger et la Commission climat pour la région du Sahel de réaffirmer leur engagement à contribuer à l'effort global de lutte contre le changement climatique. À ce sujet, je suis heureux de vous informer que les premiers résultats du processus de révision de la contribution déterminée au niveau national du Niger en cours pourraient nous amener à revoir à la hausse notre engagement de réduction des émissions à l'horizon 2030 de 3,5 à 5%, à travers notamment le développement et la promotion de l'agriculture intelligente, l'utilisation massive des énergies renouvelables et le reboisement du pays. La mise en œuvre du plan d'investissement climat pour la région du Sahel, qui est une agrégation de contributions déterminées nationales des 17 pays membres à l'horizon 2030, engendrera une contribution significative du Sahel dans cet effort planétaire. Pour le Niger, l'accord de Paris participe de l'ambition climatique que le monde se doit d'opérationnaliser dans toutes ses déclinaisons pour que la communauté internationale dépasse ces divergences et accepte la mise en œuvre effective de l'accord de Paris.
On behalf of the government and people of Grenada, I thank you for your kind invitation to this event to celebrate the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. I begin by offering my words of congratulation to the United Kingdom for its leadership, commitment, and contribution to ambitious climate action. Grenada welcomes the UK's recently announced NDC target for 2030, which reflects and responds to the climate science and the message that urgent action and ambitious actions are required to put us on a path to sustainable development. It is no secret that the impact of climate change are manifested and compounded everywhere, especially among small island developing states. While disappointingly so, the negotiators have failed to welcome the IPCC special report commissioned to guide and provide a basis for climate action. We welcome and call for ambitious actions by all to ensure that the most vulnerable among us have a fighting chance to avoid, adapt, reduce risks, and build resilience to climate-related crises. We welcome the incoming presidency of the UK, assured that with your leadership, we will advance the negotiations, agree on the outstanding issues, and catalyze global action to achieve the objectives of the Convention, the Paris Agreement, and the 2030 Agenda. Grenada is committed to playing its part despite our limited flexibilities and special circumstances exacerbated by the pandemic. Indeed, we recently completed and submitted our second NDC with an ambitious economy, wide mitigation target. We've also committed to revise and update our national adaptation plan and to develop a long-term low-carbon development strategy in line with our desire to be the first climate-smart city in the region. We will do our part, and we welcome urgent and ambitious actions from everyone to adequately address the climate crisis that is before us.
Mr. Chair, at the outset, Lao PDR has attached great importance to the climate change issue. The Lao government has mainstreamed the goals of the Paris Agreement into its National Socio-Economic Development Plan, as well as its National Green Growth Strategy. The government has set an ambitious target of reaching 70% of forest coverage of the country's total land area by 2020. In addition, the government has also adopted policies and measures, particularly on land and forest use behavior change in agriculture, which is a main sector responsible for greenhouse gas emission in the Lao PDR. The government has set the target from 2020 to 2030 to reduce carbon dioxide at the average of 1,100 kilotons per year, of which compared to the achievement reached during the period of 2000 to 2015 is threefold reduction. In this period, the government has updated its nationally determined contribution, which is a second version to be submitted soon to the UNFCCC, aimed at strengthening Lao PDR's response to the threat of climate change and contribute to the country's post-COVID-19 economic recovery by increasing resilience in the most vulnerable sectors and accelerating decarbonization. The Lao nationally determined contribution introduces a new unconditional greenhouse gas mitigation commitment by reducing greenhouse gas at the rate of 34% of the 2020 baseline by 2030, of which the average abatement of almost 4,000 kiloton carbon dioxide from 2020 onward, and will reach net zero emissions by 2050. In this regard, Lao PDR requests development partners and international community to extend their support and assistance to the Lao PDR in this endeavor. It also calls for concerted efforts from all countries to consume natural resources in a sustainable manner, employ clean energy, and follow the commitment under the Paris Agreement on reducing the greenhouse gas emissions that significantly contribute to the rising of the world temperature. Mr. Chair, in conclusion, I would like to reiterate the commitment of the Lao PDR to continue close cooperation with the international community in implementing the Paris Agreement. Thank you.
Climate change and global warming are the defining issues of our times. In India, Indian industry has stepped up to this challenge. We have also